Will you open up the meeting and let's start with the pledge and the national anthem?
Well, let's bring this meeting to order. If we'd all stand. Where's the flag? There's one over here. I pledge allegiance
Off to
the
this
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Is there a flag over there? There it is.
Can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Well, good afternoon. I trust everyone made it here to beautiful Savannah Rapids in Evans, Georgia. Oh, we're not in Evans. We're not in Augusta. We're in Augusta, Georgia. Just a little playful starting to our meeting. I want to thank all our members and especially our new members who we welcome onto the board at this full board meeting. I had the pleasure of spending time with some of our new board members at orientation last month, and I want to go around the room and embarrass them terribly and ask, but no, we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is I would like everyone to go around the room and just introduce yourself, share what committee you serve on or any position you hold on the CAB, and we'll start with me. My name is Gil Allensworth. I'm chair of the Citizens Advisory Board. I'm honored to do so. I get the opportunity as chair to serve on all the committees. So I look forward to working this year. There's a lot of change going on this year we're going to talk a lot about. And I look forward to spending more time with y'all. Doug?
My name is Doug Howard. I'm a member of the vice chair of the CAP. And I hail from Fayetteville, North Carolina, big-time Tar Heel fan. And I've been here a little over a year, and I'm from Evans, right here in Evans, Georgia. So have a great day.
Good afternoon. I'm Julia Ball, and I live in Aiken. I'm a brand new member to the CAB, and I'm very excited to learn so much about all of the goings-on within the board. My background is in nursing, and I was a professor of nursing. I'm now retired. So thank you.
Thank you. My name is Carl Steen. I'm a new member of the board. My background is in banking, mainly on the outreach side. And my goal here is to mostly do a lot of listening for a few meetings. Thank you.
I'm Dave Vivakis, Vice Chair of the Strategic and Legacy Committee. I live in Aiken and have been just completed about 2 years as a member of the CAB.
So my name is Tom French, and I'm the chairman of the Strategic and Legacy Management Committee. And I live in Aiken, and I live in the house I grew up in, so it's one of the few in Aiken.
Hi, I'm Betty Cook from Hampton County, and I'm entering my second year now. I've been a little over a year, so it's nice to meet everybody here. And I serve on the facilities. Joyce is my chairperson, and just welcome everybody that's new. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Joyce Underwood, and I'm from Crescent City, Florida. That is next to nothing, don't ask. And I am the chair of the Facilities Disposition and Site Remediation Committee. So welcome to all of my new committee members. If you want to be a co-chair, let me know. I'm looking for one. As for anything else important, I'm a military spouse, and I live in Martinez, Georgia. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is Ken Sajwan. I'm a professor of toxicology at Savannah State University, and I'm in the Waste Management Committee here. And you have a good day.
Good afternoon. I think Greg is missing. He's the vice chair. My name is Narendra Malek, and I have completed 2 years with the CAB. This is my third year. And I'm serving as chair for waste management. You know what they do with the waste? They push it in the corner, so they pushed us in the corner. And welcome to every new member.
I'm Charles Hilton. I live over in Graniteville, and I'm chairman of the Nuclear Materials Committee, and this is my second year.
Dave Isley, second year also nuclear materials. I was appointed vice chair by Charles. And welcome new members.
Do you want us to go or skip to the CAB?
Go ahead. Okay. No, we want to hear from you. You're here.
Didn't know if we were included. Hi, I'm Grace Ann Martin. I am a South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control, or SCDHEC representative, and I am kind of over the Environmental Surveillance and Oversight Program. Our new members, you will learn we have a lot of acronyms here, so we'll repeat those over and over for you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Susan Fulmer. I'm the Federal Facility Agreement Manager for South Carolina DHEC.
Good morning. I'm Michael Michelanis. I'm one of 2 deputy designated federal officials, or DDFOs, as you'll hear us refer to, required by the Federal Advisory Committee Act, that the enabling legislation for this body.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Folk. I'm the other co-DDFO with Mike here, and in my regular job, I'm the assistant manager for waste disposition for DOE.
I'm Eleanor Hobson. I have been with the CAB for 5 years. I am the Administrative and Outreach Committee Chair.
Good afternoon. I'm Bobby Williams. I am the Vice Chair of the Administrative and Outreach Committee and a member of the Strategic and Legacy Management Committee, and I've completed my second year on the CAB.
Good afternoon. My name is Ruth Hollingsworth, and I am new to the CAB board. I live in Aiken, South Carolina, and I believe I'll be serving with Joyce Underwood on the Facilities Disposition and Site Remediation Committee. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Smith. I'm from Aiken. This is my third year with the CAB, and I am also in the Facilities Disposition and Site Remediation Committee.
Afternoon, I'm Dan Kaminsky, and I did not get the picture memo. I have been on the CAB 4 years now, so this is my 5th year, and this year I've dialed it back a bit. I've been on all 4 committees over the last several years, and I will be on the Strategic Legacy and Management Committee and the Nuclear Materials Committee.
I'm Jerry Mossbarger. I live in Aiken, South Carolina, brand new to the board,
and I am serving with Dan on the Nuclear Materials Committee.
Good afternoon. I'm Carlos Cato, going into my second year with the CAB. I serve on the Strategic and Legacy Management Committee as well as Administrative and Outreach, which I didn't find out until a few months ago, but that's okay. And I live in North Augusta, South Carolina.
Good afternoon. My name is A.K. Hassan. I'm from Augusta, Richmond County, Georgia. I'm a new member to the CAB, and I'm an appointee to the Nuclear Materials Committee.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Giel. I live on St. Helena Island, which is outside Beaufort, and it's a lovely 3-hour drive from here, for those of you who might be interested. This is beginning of my second year on the CAB, and I am on both of the Strategic and Legacy Management and the Nuclear Materials Committees.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Delisa Carrico, and I'm with DOE, and I'm the Federal Coordinator for the CAB.
And I'm James Tanner. I've been working with the advisory board for, this is my 9th year, and I just keep you guys on the agenda. That's it. Gil?
We're going to Heather, and of course, Frederica back there. Hey, Frederica. Do we want to introduce them, or are we good?
Is the CAB meeting coordinator. She'll be making sure that your guys' travel is taken care of and our hotel and meeting place obligations are met. And you know Federica, who mostly works on graphic design with the External Affairs Office, and then she runs your internet, she streams your internet meetings.
And she's extremely shy, and she doesn't like to be acknowledged. So, bye, Federica. It's okay. Thank you all very much. I look forward to building relationships with everyone. Thank you for the new members. Dr. Ball, is it Dr. Hassan? I want to make sure I say that correct.
Sejman.
It's Dr. Hassan?
Sejman.
I apologize. Doctor, it's Doctor. Ruth, thank you very much for coming with us. Jerry, appreciate you. And also, Sejwan, is it Doctor? I'm thrown off completely. It's Doctor, okay. And then, excuse me? Well, here's the thing my mother always taught me. If somebody earned a doctorate, you better call them doctor. And so I've always been deathly afraid of calling somebody who's a doctor not a doctor. Okay, doctor.
Can you top it?
Well, oh, okay. And then Carl, welcome. Before I get into our chair, into our entire chair comments, I do have some sad news, but good news at the same time. Ashley Jacobs, we received her resignation on Friday afternoon. Ashley still is the Assistant County Administrator of Aiken County. However, we're very happy for her, and you will appreciate it. She is now the County Administrator for Beaufort. So she will be moving to the Beaufort area. I believe she starts the first week of April. She really did want to stay on the CAB. She tried to figure out a way to do it. However, the time commitment and with her new position, she just feels at this point it would be impossible for her to meet the duties of a CAB member. So she very reluctantly turned in her resignation. We hope that she could, once she gets a grasp of her position and wrangles everything in down there in Beaufort, that she will be able to join us again. So she has an open invitation to come back to the CAB. But unfortunately, at this time, we do have to accept her resignation. So I want to share that with the board. I'm excited, and we've talked about them, but I'm excited about our new chairman and our returning chairman. I'm really looking forward to Strategic and Legacy and seeing how Tom French will lead. We also have a very experienced and strong waste management chair in Narinder Malik. I'm looking forward to all that you will bring. Excited to see the A&O committee, Administrator Eleanor Hobson, continuing to lead. Very excited about all the things that committee is doing. Facilities disposition and site remediation, Joyce is still heading that up, and I know she's excited about the things to come. And then Charles Hilton steps in as our nuclear material chairman. He's kind of in the spotlight in his first meeting. Where are you? There you are. Today and tomorrow will be a very strong nuclear materials day as we are briefed and we learn some new things about what's going on in nuclear materials. For those of us, to the new members, this will not be a change. It'll just be the way it is. But to the new members, we have changed our work plan a little bit this year. We've talked about it extensively beforehand, and we've talked about the change. With Department of Energy's help, we are going to move forward in topics that we believe and they would like us to comment on. So what happened is that all the chairman and the vice chair sat down together in what we call the work plan meeting. And in that work plan meeting, worked up topics that are of interest to the department and to the chairs of their committees. So this year, as we go throughout our presentations, everything will be designed to lead information to the CAB so we can make informed and thorough recommendations. This is going to be a very focused year. It's going to lead us into some very direct questions, and I encourage each and every one of us to ask those questions freely. As I tell my 14-year-old son, and I question if I'm telling him the truth, I say there is no dumb question. He's 14, so sometimes he does ask questions I wonder if they are dumb, but I've told him that. There are no dumb questions here. Just because you think someone around this table may know the answer and you feel that you'll look foolish asking the question, guess what? We're around this table and we don't know what they're talking about either. So please, if there's something that stands out to you, ask the question. There's no other way you're going to learn than by asking. Also, especially to the new members, lean on the existing members as much as you're comfortable doing. Some people have heard me say over and over and ad nauseum, if it wasn't for Earl Shepard and Bob Dorr, who are no longer members of this CAB, I would have been completely lost in the first 2 years. Earl sat on my left, Bob sat on my right, and I would cover up the microphone and say, what's that mean? Why we don't encourage side talk, even though I don't pay attention to that rule, why we don't encourage side talk, I do want you to be educated, I do want you to understand, but please ask the question. And one of the things that Earl and Bob used to do was like, well, why don't you go ahead and ask? Ask questions, that's what we're here for. Our meetings run a day and a half at our full board meetings. We have the time. We have the time. So please do not be shy, do not be intimidated, do not be timid. Go ahead and ask the questions. They're all good questions. Also, we announced that we are hosting the Environmental Site-Specific Advisory Board all-chairs meeting. As a refresher, that meeting is where all the different sites inside the environmental management program come together. Their version of CABs, Citizens Advisory Boards, their chairman and vice chairman go to a site and they discuss what's going on across the entire environmental management complex. We will be hosting this year. There has been a movement. It was going to be hosted in Aiken. However, it has changed. We have a wonderful opportunity to go to the Hyatt House. It's brand new. It's downtown Augusta on Broad Street. I believe it's around the 10th to 13th block. Don't hold me to that. But it's very exciting. It's going to be a wonderful venue, and we're excited to host it there. So what will happen at that meeting, it's unbelievably educational. If you have the opportunity, CAB members, to come to Tuesday or Wednesday, or is it Wednesday and Thursday? Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. Emails will come out from James or somebody from our support staff letting us know. It will be listed in the paper. And if you have the opportunity to attend, I highly recommend you come and hear what's going on at the other sites. You learn a lot. You learn a lot at these meetings, and you hear what other sites in the country are doing to maybe meet some of the issues that they are facing. So it's, probably not even 10 minutes from here. So it's close. We understand some people drive from Buford, some people drive from other places. May not be convenient. However, I do encourage you to go. That's all I have today. But as we go through today and tomorrow, nuclear materials is going to be a very important topic. I ask that you listen intently. You ask the questions that rise, write them down, and be able to ask the presenters. We have all the right people presenting for these 2 days. and there's going to be some really good conversation, and they're going to give us some really keen insight. And I, for one, hope that the CAB can come together and come up with strong recommendations that not only benefit Savannah Riverside, but help our community as a whole. So I thank you for your time. I look forward to this meeting, and I look forward to working with all of y'all. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Gil. So let's just go over a few little housekeeping things before we get started with the rest of the day today. If you haven't found them already, restrooms are out in the hallway. Emergency exit would be the same way. Head out that way. Just a few ground rules that we want to make sure that we cover today. So number one of them is going to be holding all your questions and comments until the end of the presentation. That just helps us keep on track. Some of your questions may be answered later in the presentation, so we want to make sure that we just give the presenter a chance to get those out so that they can cover all their bases, and then if you still have questions, like Gil said, please ask away. Help us adhere to our agenda timeline just by staying on topic. I'm going to ask that you do not dominate the conversation. So one thing that's been working real well for us, I think, for the past calendar year is we've been limiting everybody to 2 questions at a time, going around the table, and then coming back if you have remaining questions. So let's keep up that pace. Let's keep up with our 2-question rule and then keep going from there. Side conversations. In order to make sure that the comments are captured as quickly as possible, the microphones are always just a little bit on. So if you do have a side conversation, please be forewarned. We may not hear it in the room, but we will hear it back in the office when we listen to the CDs and make the minutes. And yes, we do have a going pool on who said the worst thing. Please state your name and affiliation so that we know who won the pool. No, it's so that we can, on our minutes, we have an accurate record of who has said what. State your affiliation, who you're with, CAB member, DEC, DOE, that sort of thing. Listen to, respect other people's points of view. We just want to make sure that everybody is heard. You guys do a great job of that. And participate and ask questions. Like Gil said, it's the best way of understanding. And I think his son and my son must be taking notes on the dumb question aspect. But around this table, there really aren't any bad questions to ask. I have sat around here listening to presentations for years, and there are things that I'm still learning every time we have one of these meetings. So really and truly, it takes a career to learn some of this stuff, and it's the only way that you're going to get ahead is by asking questions. And let's see, make comments at a microphone. Make sure that you pull it up close to you, just like you guys did going around the table just now. You want to make sure that you speak directly into it. And the last thing I'm going to ask is that you keep your phones and pagers on silent. Yes, there are still pagers in the room. They're mostly SRS employees. But if you have one, please consider putting it on vibrate or silent if you would. Are there any questions about our ground rules for the day? No? All right. As Gil mentioned, we are going to have a panel tomorrow. This is going to be very, very different from what we normally do. We actually have 2 panels. And I'm really excited for it because usually you get little bits of presentation. So you'll get a little bit of information on liquid waste, maybe hear something about the tank farms, and then down the road you'll get a little bit about salt waste. But what you're getting tomorrow is a complete picture of everything you need to know about 235F in the morning, and then a complete picture of really what you need to know about H Canyon and L Basin and how to really wrestle with those decisions. So I'm hoping that it's going to work out really well. One of the best features of it is that everybody presenting tomorrow will still be sitting at the table, and they will be able to help you make those connections that you're sometimes left on your own to make. So it's going to be a great opportunity for all those questions and comments and answers, and a way to truly understand these processes and what the site is facing in the next few years. And lastly, one more thing I want to cover before we get going is one of the things that we have to do today is edits to some draft recommendations, and we definitely need to make some edits to the integrated priority list letter. And we'll go over what those are a little bit later, but one of the things that I want you to remember is that if you're in recommendation manager for one of those or a committee chair, if you accept the edit, please make sure that you state it clearly so that we can get it recorded and get the edit checked. And if you would also, when you're making a suggested change, please repeat it, maybe more than once, just so that we can make sure that we capture it correctly. Heather's great. She's brand new working with us, but one thing she can't do, even though I tried to get it in the position description, is read minds. So I do need you to be careful and cautious about the way that you're stating everything. Any questions going forward? All right. We're running a actually on time. But one of the things is the site manager was a little bit delayed leaving today. He's on his way right now. But what I'm going to ask is, DHEC, do you mind giving your update now? Can we skip ahead to you guys? All right, let's go.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Susan Fulmer. I'm the Federal Facility Agreement Manager for South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control. I'd like to welcome everyone, and especially all of our new board members. I've got one agency update, and then I'll go through some soil and groundwater updates for you. As you may have heard, on February 26th, Dr. Rick Toomey was confirmed as the department's new director. He's a native of Greenville. Dr. Toomey holds more than 32 years of public health administration and executive management experience. Prior to his current role, he served as the president and CEO of Beaufort Memorial Hospital. In addition, he spent 8 years as a healthcare consultant, primarily in Florida and in Chicago, Illinois, before joining the staff of Nash Healthcare Systems in North Carolina in 1989. In 1998, he was named president and CEO of Nash Healthcare Systems, and Dr. Toomey most recently served as a member of the South Carolina Board of Health and Environmental Control. For the Federal Facility Agreement soil and groundwater updates, I wanted to let you know that since January, the last board meeting, we received clean copies. So that means that we have received copies where we've already reviewed and approved the documents. And those are for primarily for the wetland area at Dunbarton Bay. We've received the corrective measures implementation, remedial action implementation plan. We've received the land use control implementation plan and the field sampling plan. All of those are for the wetland area at Dunbarton Bay. DHEC recently approved the periodic report 6 for the Steel Creek Integrator Operable Unit, revision 1. We are actively reviewing the D area operable unit documents associated with the ash basins, and we expect a focused corrective measure study, feasibility study letter to be coming to us in April. And that will be followed by an early action statement of basis proposed plan in October. So that will be a document that's available for public comment when that comes out. The G area oil seepage basin operable unit record of decision revision 0 is currently under review by the department. The ROD, or record of decision, will be issued by September 30th of 2019. So that one had a opportunity for public comment for the statement of basis proposed plan that was out in November, I believe, of 2018. Last week, DHEC conducted a site visit with DOE and EPA for the 6th 5-year review remedy view for operable units with native soil covers and land use controls. The 3 parties will work through any comments, and the final report will be issued in February 2020. For high-level waste updates, in February, DHEC approved the salt waste processing facility startup extension request, which extends SWPF's commencement of operations date until December 28th of 2019. March 18th and 19th, DHEC participated in the Nuclear Regulatory Commission monitoring on-site observation visit to the F and H area tank farms. And currently, DHEC is working with EPA and DOE on an update to the high-level waste tank milestone suspension agreement. As you may recall, in 2017, we agreed on a suspension to the milestones for the high-level waste tanks in order to get a new contractor, a liquid waste contractor on board for DOE to work out some budget issues. And due to some continuing issues with the new contractor being awarded, we have agreed with DOE that it would be prudent to continue the suspension of those milestones. So we're working on a new suspension agreement for the milestones at this time. We're still working through that process, but we think we have a pretty good agreement framework in place, and we should have that finalized probably in the next few weeks, and we'll provide an update to the CAB at the next meeting. Any questions?
We got one. Narinder?
Narendra Malik, CAB. You talked about wetlands. How many wetlands are at SRS and how they are classified? Can they be used for any industrial purposes?
You said the tanks? Is that what you asked? I couldn't quite hear. I'm sorry.
Wetlands.
Oh, wetlands. How many wetlands are at SRS?
Yeah.
There are a lot of wetlands at SRS. And they're part of our integrator operable units. So they would be captured either within the cleanups of the operable units or when we clean up or work on an integrator operable unit. We look at the sediments and soils and surface water. That's part of the IOU, or the integrator operable unit.
I have one more question. If any area which has a wetland, can it be used for any industrial building or any other purposes? And what kind of permits will be required?
Okay, so can the wetlands be used for building? Okay. No, that would be, to use a wetland, you would need approval with the Army Corps of Engineers to fill that in, to first of all, and I believe DHEC would also be involved in that. And I don't believe that there's any proposal to use a wetland for building on site. There's so much acreage out there, if they needed something, it would not be looking at wetlands.
I think there were a couple of instances that they had to go to DHEC and Corps of Engineers to build artificial replacement wetlands.
That may be true, I think, from a mitigation standpoint, to build wetlands if something had been filled in the past. The work that's being done at Wetland Area at Dunbarton Bay is an ash removal project. So there, in the past, had been ash that had been disposed in that area, and they're going to be removing what they can there. There may be some that's left in place because it's been, because so many trees and vegetation is built up in that area already, that it would be more destructive to go in and remove that and destroy the habitat that is there than to leave some of that in place. But we will, they will have started working on getting the roads in to remove the ash that they can without impacting the wetland negatively.
Okay. Dan?
Dan Kaminsky, CAB. Thank you for the update, Susan. Just a quick question for my own refreshment and the rest of the CAB. What was the original start date set for SWPF? And so that's now December 28th, you said?
That's correct. It was, I believe, the end of last year. Jim maybe can give you the right date. Yeah, November, he said.
Okay. And could you, for the sake of a little bit of education, describe which milestones we're negotiating currently?
Okay, so these are high-level waste tank milestones. They encompass, these are all listed in the Federal Facility Agreement in Appendix L. They encompass bulk waste removal milestones, so that's getting waste out of the tanks, and it also includes milestones for grouting the tanks up. So those are the ones that, what we had done in 2017 was to only suspend the milestones that were going to be coming up in the next couple of years, because our plan was to be negotiating right now and get them finalized by, look at the whole schedule, but the milestones that we would have missed in this time period from 2017 through a few in 2019, that those would be suspended until we could renegotiate everything, knowing that we would have SWPF started up. And at that point, things could be ramping up with processing. And we had planned to be negotiating that now with the schedule finalized by, I think, end of May of 2019. So, due to some unforeseen circumstances, we think it's better to just hold off and still renegotiate everything at one time rather than trying to come up with another arbitrary date for resetting those milestones.
Okay. Any more questions from around the table for DHEC? All right, seeing none.
Got one update from Grace Ann.
Grace Ann?
Hi, Grace Ann Martin from South Carolina DHEC. We, in February, were able to publish our Environmental Surveillance and Oversight Annual Report. And so I think I sent James an email, so you may have received that for the link to our website. But we do have some hard copy CDs that are available on one of the back tables that you all are welcome to take home with you. Thank you.
And she's going to be presenting later today on that, so yeah. And if you don't get a chance to get a hard copy, let me know and I'll make sure that you get that link. Any other copy or questions for DHEC before we move on? All right. Thomas, you just stormed in. If you want, we can delay it. We can move on to committee chairs or we can do DOE now. You tell me what you want to do. You want to do it now? All right, let's go. Let's go with Thomas Johnson for the DOE update.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Apologize for being late. Had an issue. We're working with headquarters. So Mike should be here. Bundy should be here in a few minutes, but don't want to delay the update any more than we have. Excuse me. All right. Well, good afternoon. Glad to be here with you in Augusta. You know, after having met with you all last in January at Hilton Head. First, wanted to welcome 6 new board members. We did have the opportunity to meet with them recently on site, and I just want to thank you for serving, signing up to serve on the board. Your work with the department is certainly meaningful, and hopefully it will be equally rewarding to you as well.
Okay. Thomas, can you pull that up for me a little bit? Just a little bit, pull the mic a little bit closer. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Okay, contract updates. Let's better. All right, management and operations contract. Reported to you back in the October timeframe that we'd postponed any further action on the M&O contract as we were going through a joint study with NNSA and EM regarding the future scope of NNSA activities at SRS. No decision has been made on that yet, so nothing new to report in that area. The SRS contract runs through July 31st of 2019. Liquid waste, we did announce on February 26th that we were canceling the solicitation for liquid waste services due to some programmatic changes in the SRS liquid waste service requirements, including integrating certain portions of nuclear materials management mission into the SRS into the liquid waste mission and the new end states contract model. Specifically, what we were doing there is for the operations of H Canyon and for L Basin will be incorporated into the new solicitation for the liquid waste contract. Current liquid waste contractor, Savannah River Mediation, will continue to operate the liquid waste facilities until a new contractor is selected. On March 11th, we announced that we were proposing to extend their current contract for an additional 18 months. The current contract extension expires on March 31st. For the paramilitary security contract on March 6th, we issued the final request for proposal for paramilitary services. The current contract is held by Centera SRS LLC and expires on October 7th, 2019. Total estimated value of that contract is approximately $600 million to $1 billion over a 10-year period. Now, on that solicitation, a little bit different than what DOE has been doing in the last few years, where we bypassed the draft RFP stage and went straight to a final RFP for that particular solicitation. A little bit different in that the scope on paramilitary services has remained relatively stable over the years, and when we had prior interactions with industry, the feedback was that didn't feel that a draft RFP would really be necessary given fairly certain scope that's within that particular solicitation. From a budget standpoint, President's budget request for FY20 was released on March 11th. The request includes $1.6 billion for EM at Savannah River, which is approximately $91 million above the 2019 enacted level. I've heard that the additional budget details were released today, but I have not seen those just yet. And so we have to keep the discussion at a fairly high level until the actual details are released to the public. Back to the budget. This supports a general ramp-up of the liquid waste program in preparation of the initiation of radioactive operations at the salt waste processing facility in FY20. We've discussed this before, but operations of SWPF will significantly increase the salt treatment capacity, which will result in increased risk reduction by removing and treating liquid waste currently in the underground storage tanks. To this effect, we will work on a dozen tanks to prepare the required feed and implement 24/7 operations in the saltstone facilities and complete the final tie-ins. The Defense Waste Processing Facility will produce approximately 80 to 100 canisters of vitrified waste processed from tank waste, and much of the work will be executed in support of regulatory commitments with the state of South Carolina. FY20 request also supports continuing the saltstone disposal unit number 7. Cell construction, if you remember, a short time ago we completed SDU number 6, and 7 is essentially the same as SDU number 6. Completing the design and initiating construction on SDUs number 8 and 9 will also occur during the FY20 timeframe, and we'll be initiating the design on saltstone disposal units 10, 11, and 12. Well, for the benefit of the new board members, I think we explained it when you all visited us, but certainly for those that have been on the board for a while now, it may sound like a number of SDUs are in construction at once, but the reason behind it is that when we bring the salt waste processing facility on board, we're going to need those mega disposal facilities already to be in place when SWPF starts up. As far as making progress, one more thing on the 20 budget, the Advanced Manufacturing Collaborative. You may have noticed in the high-level budget brief that there was approximately $50 million that was in the FY20 budget for the Advanced Manufacturing Collaborative, or AMC, as we've spoken in the past. This is going to be a modern research and development facility accessible to commercial industry and academia. As far as making progress, nuclear materials program, you'll hear a number of presentations on tomorrow that will focus on 2 topics in the nuclear materials regarding the 235F risk reduction and the potential decommissioning schedules, and then the H Canyon options for processing spent nuclear fuel. We look forward to your input on these presentations on tomorrow. As a general status of the nuclear materials program, in H Canyon, we'll continue to process the high-flux isotope reactor, or HIFER fuel, material test reactor fuel, and the test residue material from Canada. L area continues to receive domestic and foreign research reactor fuels, and K area continues to support the removal of 1 metric tons of plutonium from South Carolina in plutonium downblending. And 235F continues its risk reduction activities with removal of approximately 70 grams of PU-38 to date. For the liquid waste program, DWPF, or Defense Waste Processing Facility, the new process water chiller is currently in testing and maintenance work. Testing and maintenance work on the plug welder continues. We poured and leak tested 12 canisters so far in FY19. For the modular caustic side, solvent extraction unit, or MCU, is operating well with the new longer coalescer media, and I think Mike spoke on it extensively at the Hilton Head meeting. The strip effluent coalescer pump was replaced and is also working well. Thus far in FY19, a little over 166,000 gallons of salt waste feed has been transferred from tank 49 to the actinide removal process. For the Saltstone facility, operating while temporary modification installation is in process. For the air compressor upgrades continuing, the Saltstone has processed nearly 370,000 gallons of decontaminated salt in FY19. For the 3H evaporator, operations are currently paused to switch the drop tank from tank 30 to tank 37. This is because tank 30 is now full and will restart once the switch is completed. One of the relatively new projects that we've spoken a lot on here recently was on the ticker, or the tank closure cesium removal project. Batch 1 of the initial ticker radioactive operations was successfully completed on February 15th, and batch 2 preparations have begun. Thus far, ticker has processed approximately 152,000 gallons of decontaminated salt solution. The ticker will supplement existing and planned facilities in the removal of radioactive cesium from the waste, keeping the DOE priority of protecting people and the environment. And lastly, in this section on the Saltstone Disposal Unit 7, construction is is progressing safely and is on schedule. 4 wall sections have been put in place thus far, and this is out of a total of 25 wall sections that will need to be put in place. And we've also completed 10 out of the 14 floor sections that's required for the unit. Construction is being completed by a subcontractor, D&T Tanks, and this is the same contractor that built SDU 6. Salt waste processing facility. SWPF continues the startup and commissioning activities to identify potential issues for resolution before radioactive waste is introduced into the facility. Chemical introduction into the plant was authorized in November of 2018. Systemization of several of the process systems continues, with chemicals as a precursor to initiating cold commissioning. One more thing on this, so this has been a phased effort. Initially we started with running water through the facility, then progressing on to chemicals. And once we have the assurance that the facility is capable of operating correctly, then eventually we'll be able to move into processing radioactive materials through the facility. We expect SWPF to be completed on schedule and within the total project cost of approximately $2.3 billion. We're confident in the safe and effective commissioning, startup, and eventual operation of SWPF to further build upon the department's strong track record of addressing tank waste at Savannah River. With respect to soil and groundwater cleanup, the wetland area at Dunbarton Bay, field work began on the remedial action in early February time frame. This includes the excavation of 12 acres of coal ash, or approximately 25,000 cubic yards. And this is scheduled for disposal at Three Rivers landfill that's also located on Savannah River. The action is scheduled for completion in December of 2019. F-area groundwater treatment, subsurface injections of silver chloride continue to treat the groundwater plume and is now more than 50% complete. The FY19 campaign will complete by the end of the spring. A major effort to repair our main site roadway, or Road C. This is the primary road that's coming, that goes into the site through the Jackson Barricade. We've now completed all of the culvert work for Road C, and they've now started the milling, paving, and restriping of the road. If you remember from a few years ago, I think approximately 2 years ago now, we started the repaving of the roads there on site. This has been something that has been needed. Prior to this effort, it had been more than about 20 years since any of the roads had received any significant repaving or upgrades. And then the last area I want to cover is on Savannah River National Laboratory. SRNL continues to partner with NNSA, universities, and others to advance the nation's nuclear security. Just last week, SRNL signed a memorandum of understanding with the U.S. Army Cyber School, which are steps towards establishing a long-term strategic relationship between the two organizations. The initial MOU addresses potential establishment of a cyber training range at SRNL that would enable the Army field testing and an exchange program that would create continuing education opportunities for both the school and lab personnel. We have some other cybersecurity MOUs that are in the works. We still have a little bit more work to do on some of those others before we can do any kind of public announcement on it. And with that, I'll take a breath and take some questions.
All right, folks. Doug, let's start with you.
Doug Howard Cab. Thomas, thank you for the update. I do have a question on the site security. How long has Centera had the contract out there?
That contract is approximately 10 years old. Unlike the others, we've not done an extension on that one, and I'm hoping that we're going to be able to proceed through the award and not require an extension. One of the other benefits of not going through the draft process, and I said the primary benefit was that the scope has been pretty stable through the years, but that also shaves a little bit of time off of the selection process, the acquisition and selection process, by not going the route of the draft first.
The other question I had, if another contractor were to get that contract, how would the switchover go? I mean, I know they have lots of weapons and vehicles and equipment out there. With that, what would the transition period be like? Do you have any idea?
Yes. Typically for our contracts, the transition will be anywhere from 60 to 90 days. And I don't expect it to be any different in this case.
So we wouldn't have to worry about any breach of security, anything like that?
I'm fairly certain we won't be, there'll be no concern for breaches of security. As a matter of fact, I was speaking with someone the other day and went into one of the facilities on site and commented that you can see the differences between the security forces, the folks you encounter at the perimeter barricade. They're all smiles and jovial and speak to you, and the further you go into the site, the closer you get to sensitive material, the less friendly those guys become. And you don't see very many smiles, and they're not guys to have lots of interactions with.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Dave Vivakis.
Dave Vivakis, Cab. Thank you, sir, for bringing us up to date on much of the work that's going on. My question, you mentioned about this new advanced manufacturing collaborative project.
Yes.
$50 million in the request to Congress. I know you said you're just starting to get all the details on this. I'm just wondering, can you give us some more information about what this is and where it's going to be constructed, and what of that $50 million do we know? Is it mostly staffing, or is it?
No. So on the AMC, and I think I made mention before, it will actually provide some laboratory space, testing kinds of space available both for industry and academia. And the facility's planned location is outside of the boundary of the site. We've had some discussions with one of the local universities not too far from the site as the potential location. The project has gone through various variations over the last few years, where it was going to be a leased facility, but as we've gone through that process, decisions were made where it would be, rather than having it as a leased facility, would be one that would be, initial construction would actually be funded and paid for by the department, opposed to trying to use third-party financing to do it. There have been a few successes across the country where there's been some third-party financed efforts, but even most of those have run into pretty significant issues in trying to secure the funding, because one of the biggest issues were whether there were going to be, what type of funding would actually be needed with it. If you were doing a capital lease, I believe is the proper term for it, you needed to have all the monies up front at the time that you were going to initiate that lease. If you were going to do it as an operating lease, you didn't need the entire funding up front, but you would certainly have to be in a position where you could sign the lease and sign for a long-term agreement. And you can imagine that with someone else using their financing, they would want the commitment from the department, from the federal government for an extended period of time. But where we've eventually moved to is, rather than trying to utilize third-party funding, this is now going to be department-funded facility.
Is some of this work being done elsewhere now, like by the Savannah River National Lab?
Lab is doing some of the work now on site, but as you can imagine, trying to bring in industry or academia into the site, behind the gates and into the lab is a pretty difficult task to do. And the thought being that if we had something outside of the gates, it would be much easier to provide collaboration outside of the department.
Thank you.
All right. Greg?
Thank you, Greg Murray, CAB. Thank you, Thomas, for the review for us. Going to the MOU you've got with the Army Cyber School, could you give us a few more details on that? And then also maybe comment a bit on whether you've done anything with the Cyber Institute at Augusta University in this regard?
Well, I'll start with the last part of your question. That's when I said that we had some other agreements that we were working on. That's one of the ones that we are working. We're just not yet ready for a public announcement on it. On the effort with the Army, we did have, I guess, the general was there on site last week in the actual signing of that agreement. And as you're aware, the Army Cyber School is intended to provide a pretty significant economic benefit to this area as far as the number of personnel that they're going to bring on board. Now, one of the things that we should be able to do with the cyber school is we have the ability to provide a pretty unique testing environment there on site, and the thought being that we should be able to work through or work those kinds of things there on site. We also, if you remember, we have a facility down in Charleston as well, where we may be able to do some collaboration with them.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay. Dan?
Hey, just a quick question on the President's request for fiscal year 20. How did the $1.6 billion that he's requesting for our budget, how's that comparing to what our request was?
How's that comparing to?
What Savannah River site was requesting?
Would you like to phone a friend?
Dave?
Hey, Mike, can I get you to grab a microphone, maybe?
Hey, you know, we're part of the administration. So the request from the president is Savannah River's request. Okay?
But Dan, that's why I was kind of struggling a little bit. I mean, we work a request. You know, within the department, it goes up to headquarters. But you know, Mike's absolutely right. Once it goes through that process, and the president makes a request, we don't get the opportunity to speak too much about what we would like to have had.
No, I knew that, but usually there's another number that we were hoping to seek.
Now,
compared
we'll
to what
have,
we're getting approved for?
and if you remember, this is just kind of the start of the budgeting process. You know, we'll continue to work with the, you know, folks on the appropriators side and others in Congress. Matter of fact, one of the reasons in being a little bit late today was trying to get some information back up to headquarters to go over to Congress in dealing with some of the impacts based on the number that we actually have in the president's request. So it's not the end of the road for us. You know, we'll continue to push for what we believe we need, you know, for each of the programs that are on site.
Thank you.
All right, Jim?
Jim Gill, CAB. Thank you for the presentation and the update. With the continuing progress made with the salt waste disposal process, what is the expectations for old tanks being closed, finished, and done with?
Well, I'll start, and then I'll have Jim Folk, the assistant manager that actually manages the liquid waste program for us. But I know there's been some recent discussions with the regulators regarding the tanks, and part of the issue that we've had has been, you know, whether we've had the right budget, bringing the salt waste processing facility online. As we're trying to work through some of those kinds of things, it did require some additional discussions with the regulators, and I'll let Jim go as far as he can on that one.
Yeah, you heard Jim Folk, DOE, by the way. You heard earlier from Susan our discussions from the regulatory side of the house. The tank closure schedules, you know, one of the big things that we're looking at right now is being able to remove the waste from a few of those tanks that are down in the water table. So, you know, our heavy focus right now is in H tank farm, 9, 10, and 11 will probably be the next tanks that we're really focused in hard on. For instance, tank 10 is where Ticker is, removing cesium. So when you look at the overall schedule, we're probably about 4 years away from the next tank closure, but we're making good progress down in that area. It's really about removing the risk is our key emphasis right now. Once we then can focus into the operational closure, filling it with grout, but we're really focused in on those tanks next.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions from around the table? Oh, Gil.
Thomas, thanks. Always appreciate hearing you. I got a question on the M&O and the M&O portion in the liquid waste. I know there's nothing to report on the NNSA conversations, like you said, but should we? I mean, it's just the timing seems. Is there something tied together there with the NNSA discussion and the liquid waste being not off solicitation?
No, not really. The reason why the discussion started with NNSA really was related to, with all the new missions that they're expected to have come to the site, the discussion started as to whether they would or should be the landlord, or whether EM should serve as the landlord, continue to serve as the landlord for the site. And so we had the study, and the report was due to headquarters, I believe it was December 20th. And I'd like to say to folks, like most good DOE studies, you know, we sent recommendations forward, and then that's kind of where things stopped for a little while here. But anyway, no direct tie back to the liquid waste, but you know, you heard me mention that for H Canyon operations and L Basin, those are scopes right now that's part of the M&O contract. And so we've now have to kind of figure out, and that's going to be a part of the new liquid waste solicitation. We've got to figure out the right timing on when that comes out of the M&O and into the liquid waste acquisition. So, because I mentioned the 2 dates, because right now we're seeking an 18-month extension on the liquid waste contract. That right now it expires the end of, March 31st, and then the M&O expires July 31st. But with us sitting here today in March, and that M&O expires in July, and we have no active solicitation on the street. I think most folks can probably figure out what's going to happen on the M&O contract as well.
So just, so I think, so the subcontractor now for H Canyon and L Basin's SRS, right?
No, they're the SRS is the prime contractor.
Is the primary, but they're the contractors over the H Canyon and L Basin?
Yes.
And so that may shift, am I understanding that right?
That scope is going to shift from being a part of the M&O contract to being a part of what was the liquid waste contract. Now, as far as the contractor that may be doing the work, that just depends on how the solicitation works out.
Okay.
I know that may sound like a bit of a cop-out, but I can't say that
No.
SRS isn't going to be a part of it because I have no idea who's going to bid on it.
Because we talked about at the last meeting, SRS is ramping up with their hiring because of the extra potential, whatever, that we don't talk about. So I'm just wondering, would SRR take a larger, but I guess that's the whole solicitation thing, so.
Yeah, the solicitation would have, the liquid waste solicitation would have a larger scope than what exists today. And then but that additional scope is going to come out of what's now in the M&O contract. Now, and on the M&O side, remember the M&O supports both EM and NNSA. And so as the NNSA scope grows, that may not necessarily have a negative impact on the amount of services that the M&O actually provides.
Thanks.
Dave, that sparked some questions for you, didn't it?
Dave Vavagas, CAB. Does any of this affect the contract with Parsons?
No, this does not affect the contract with Parsons. Parsons' contract is for the design, construction, and eventually 1 year's operation of the salt waste processing facility. And so the thought being that after they've gone through the 1 year of operations, it would be turned over to the liquid waste contractor. That scope is in the current contract, so should the current contract still be in place, we can turn that scope over to the current contractor. And if we've moved on to the next solicitation by the time that comes, it'll be built into that solicitation as well.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Any other questions around the table? All right. Thank you, Thomas. All right, folks. Let's move up into the committee updates. We'll give a chance for each committee chair to talk a little bit about what it is they do mostly as we start out this new CAB year. Eleanor, let's start with A&O, if you'll pull the microphone right up to you.
Eleanor Hobson, Chair of the Administrative and Outreach Committee. First of all, the committee will meet this afternoon after the full board meeting. There's a door directly behind us, over in the corner, not directly in the corner, and that door leads to a room, a conference room. We will meet there, A&O committee members, and if any of our new members desire to join us, you may do so. An update on CAB members. We would like for you to join us on our tours. And we have tours set up for April and September for CAB members. Those are very important to us. James will send you correspondence through your email concerning those tours. Sign up for them. And we just appreciate all of you, all the new members. And sometimes our former members return, such as Harold today, and there may be others. And that's our update for today.
I know we're still early in the year, but are there any questions for Eleanor and A&O? Seeing none. Joyce, you ready for FDSR?
Joyce Underwood, CAB. I was hoping to introduce Avery, our point of contact, but she's not here, so maybe tomorrow.
She wanted to be here. She was unable to make it today, but she will be here tomorrow.
Okay, well, any of the new people, hopefully we'll have an opportunity to point Avery out tomorrow. In the meantime, welcome to Columbia County. I'm saying that because I live here. I'm so glad that you're all here today. And what am I? Facilities, disposition, and site remediation. What does that mean? We clean things and we tear things apart. I figured that out. It's a simple way to put it. So for all of our new committee members, first of all, I would like to reiterate what Gil said. Ask questions. Ask lots of questions. And even if you think you're going to look stupid, that's okay. Ask questions anyway, because you're never going to look as dumb as I do, because I'm good at asking questions. So what do we got on our agenda for this year? We're going to have the annual site environmental report, which is the ACER. I'll get to that. The federal, state, and oversight of cleanup, and our REMOP update, which is a really long thing, and I don't remember what it stands for, but those are all going to be on the agenda. But in addition to that, I'm really excited that we're going to talk about the deactivation and decommissioning of excess buildings. I'm very, very excited as that is on the agenda. In fact, in May, so don't miss May's meeting, because I'm super stoked about this. We have a couple of things that we're going to close that were on the other slide, and we're going to talk about this tomorrow or today. Draft pollinator management plan today. So yes, that is what we have going on in my committee, and I'm super stoked to meet all you new people, and you should all come to my committee because it's awesome.
Any questions for Joyce? All right. Let's move on to nuclear materials and Charles.
Charles Hilton, CAB. For those of you new, welcome aboard. And the function of the Nuclear Materials Committee, and I quote from our charter, it was established to study issues that involve nuclear materials, generally uranium and plutonium, that have an impact on present and future SRS activities, but are not considered waste. I think this puts the spent fuel rods in our purveyance, as well as about 6 tons, I believe, of plutonium of the 40 tons that are out there. In the last CAB meeting, DOE making recommendations back to them as far as citizen input. This was a new approach, one that I personally like, because we can actually focus on what they need. The problem with their request was that both of the recommendations that they need by the May meeting, giving us some 2 months. Tomorrow's meeting will be basically about nuclear materials, focusing on 2 areas. H Canyon, I'm trying not to use acronyms for our new members. H Canyon is a separations facility, mainly for our fuel rods, and its long-term goals. The other, and you've already heard about it, is 235F. Well, what's a 235F? It's a facility that has been contaminated with plutonium-238, which was the fuel source for much of the space program. So those things need recommendations very quickly, and we have requested Department of Energy to make presentations immediately to us for that purpose. So tomorrow's is going to be basically owned by the Nuclear Materials Committee. Hopefully, we will have the first meeting for the committee meeting will be April the 16th, I believe, James. Yes. There is a strong possibility there will be another meeting required to meet the time frame, but at the same time, we'll look to see how it goes. And if there's no questions, that will conclude the report, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any questions for Charles and Nuclear Materials? You're going to have some tomorrow, I promise. You ready for Strategic and Legacy Management, Tom?
I am. I'm Tom French, and I'm the chairman of the Legacy Management, Strategic Legacy Management. And it's a very confusing title for the new people on the board. I'm wrestling with how we define this, and I think what we're going to do is look at, Dan was doing a good job last year as the chairman trying to sort this out, and I'm kind of trying to catch up with Dan a little bit. But the strategic part is when we look at progress on the site, sometimes it's very difficult to understand the complexity. It's a very complex, large project, And the people on the board and in the community, sometimes it's hard for them to see through all the numbers, tables of numbers and things. So Dan had started making a graphic representation of what's going on. And I think we're going to continue that this year. And I'll give you a good example. Jim Folk was talking about we're working in H area because these tanks are all below the water level, but we're not going to close another tank for 4 years. Well, really, there's a tremendous amount of work going on in each tank, and we need to make sure people understand that. It's not like they're just sitting on the hill waiting for 3 years and they're going to go down the bottom and fill the thing with grout. So we're trying to figure out a way to portray that so we all understand that better. The second part of the title is legacy management. And since I worked at the National Laboratory for quite a long time, legacy management was something we talked about a lot. I was environmental cleanup, and we talked about legacy management. Legacy management is looking at the site. The DOE owns a very large piece of property. They've got missions that extend in the future, so they've got to keep the property. They can't sell it off. They have to have the buffers. They got to have the security. And so one of the things that's very important to understand that is how do you maintain that property, this huge property, over another 50 or 60 years or whatever the number is. And so we're going to start looking at what does that mean and how would you approach that? This has nothing to do with the industrial sector. This has to do with all the rest, the forest, the lakes, the creeks, all those important things that have to be maintained, but you got to know what you're doing. So the first piece of that is we've introduced a recommendation accepted by the committee, and we're going to present it for a vote for the full cab tomorrow on the NERP. And I'm sure all the new people and some of the old people don't know what a NERP is, but it's a National Environmental Research Park. And Savannah River site was the first, and it was made a NERP in 1975. And what that means is the whole site is an outdoor ecological research lab. And so the ecology lab, University of Georgia, is the group that maintains that is responsible for it. So they went through whatever it was, 1975. They developed 30 set-aside areas on the site that would be not in any of the industrial activities, but they'd be baseline sites. And they went and baselined them, and they go back and study them occasionally. And so we had a few recommendations that we'd like to see that maybe add a couple of things to it, maybe go back and re-baseline some of those old sites. There's a tremendous amount of really valuable information out there for the future of the site as well as for the country. So that's why we're making that recommendation. And in alignment with Joyce's committee, I'm giving you a lot more detail than you maybe want, but in alignment with Joyce's committee, there's a recommendation about pollinators in the NERP. Recommendation, you'll see that tomorrow. So thank you.
All right. Any questions for strategic? Narinder, let's talk about waste management.
Narendra Malik, I'd like to welcome all of you to our beautiful city, Martinez. Sometimes it's pronounced as Martinez. One time, one of the GCO is called Generating Official, had a sign in his office, if it's not waste, it's not ours. So, you know, we deal with waste. We will be working with Jim and his team in the waste management for tank closures, management of hazardous and solid waste, including mixed waste. We will be touching certain regulatory requirements in the NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act, RECRA, CERCLA, and FFA, because they are all linked together, and we work in the management of waste according to the requirements of federal and state regulatory requirements. There are 2 open recommendations at this moment, and our next committee meeting is on April 23rd at 5 o'clock in the DOE office. Thank you.
All right. Any questions for Narinder? Any questions on any of the other committees that we haven't gotten to yet? Gil?
I really thank all the committee chairs for your continued service to the CAB. Committee meetings are extremely important. I say this to our new members as well as our current, well, our current. But please, when we talk about these committee meetings are where we actually get into the nitty-gritty of doing the recommendation work. They're extremely important. So, Chairman, please reach out to your committee members, reminding them of your meetings. And as this year proceeds, we're going to have a lot of conversation during committee with going over nuclear materials. Your committee meeting next month is going to be outrageous. You're going to have a ton to go over. But your committee meetings, please go, because that's where the conversation really takes place. Thank you all very much for everything you do, and I look forward to seeing all the work that you get done this year.
Okay. Any other comments that we need to hit? So let's do this. We're running a little bit early, but let's take advantage of it to some extent. CAB members, let's take a group photograph and let's do it right now. Let's go ahead and take our break. We'll meet out on the patio out here. CAB members, take a group photo. Everybody, let's return from our break at 2:45. I'm giving you lots of time so we can be on time. 2:45, please. Thank you. Thank you. All right, everybody. So up next we have Grace Ann Martin. She's with South Carolina DHEC, and she's going to go over their environmental report and cover their details. So, Grace Ann, forward, right there in the middle.
All right, can everyone hear me well? Okay, well, my name is Grace Ann Martin, and I am with South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control, or DHEC. I am part of the Environmental Surveillance and Oversight Program, or ESOP, as we like to say. Again, we have a lot of acronyms in the government system for our new members. Today, I'm going to be covering kind of the general overview of what our ESOP program does. So we may not go into as much detail on data, but as I mentioned earlier, we have our data report that we published at the beginning of January that's available online, as well as in the back there are a couple of CDs that you all are welcome to take home with you, where you can see both our report as well as data that you can download and run your own calculations on if you would like that. All right, so just to give a general overview of DHEC. DHEC is actually one of 3 places in the country where we have our health department and our environmental group or agency kind of bonded together. So that makes it to where our mission is to promote and protect the health of both people and the environment. And the way in which we do that in South Carolina, our state is broken up into 4 regions. For our Aiken branch, we are located in the Midlands region, which is located right in this area, that red band. For us, we excuse me, have our kind of headquarters based in Columbia. They're the ones that are kind of creating policy, creating the regulatory standards that we need to do. And there are around 40 branches across the state of South Carolina that help us to go and do the boots on the ground efforts. So in our Aiken office, we have people go and do air quality monitoring or regulatory work. And we do regulatory work of the Savannah River site, but our group is focused on purely monitoring the Savannah River site. And that is, our ESOP group is unique only to Aiken because we are located 20 miles above the Savannah River site. Now, in I think the early 1990s, the DOE, the Department of Health and Environmental Control, and the Savannah River site formed an agreement in principle, which created the Federal Facilities Agreement, which is what Susan covers, and our ESOP program. And as I mentioned a second ago, our ESOP program is focused solely on monitoring. So we do have part of our work through DHEC will cover the regulatory side, but our ESOP program has been built just to monitor the Savannah River site. And so we monitor the environment. We support the agency's regulatory program by doing that monitoring work. And so our primary function is to evaluate the effectiveness of the Savannah River site's monitoring by conducting non-regulatory monitoring on and around the site. This allows us to kind of conduct evaluations of the monitoring program that the site does, as well as it allows us to produce our own kind of independent information that allows us to provide a verification system of the data that's being collected at the site. And so for our program, we use our scientists to go and collect air, water, soil, vegetation, milk, and fish and game samples. And so that's what we're going to cover today, is kind of what we do with those monitoring efforts. So the first program that we do is radiological atmospheric surveillance, or we focus on the air quality. And so with all of our programs, we are going to be looking at the amount of radiation that is present out on the site from legacy waste. And so with our air program, we have a system, an air station that we use, which you can, oops, there we go. You can see right here, this is one of our air stations. On the top, you see a little chimney. In that chimney, it has it has a silica glass fiber filters, there we go, that collect particles out of the air. And we collect those one time a week to test for alpha and beta particles. On top of the system, we also have a rain collection pail. And then inside the system, we have a silica gel distillates, which are going to be looking at the water. That's either the humidity or that we've collected from rain. And in those, we collect those one time a month, and we're able to test for tritium that has been present in the air or in the rainwater that we have over a month's course. And along with our air stations, we also have set up TLDs, or thermoluminescent dosimeters, that allow us to look for beta and gamma particles on a quarterly basis. And here's a map of where we have our air stations and TLDs. So the air stations are the blue dots. We have 9 of those air stations. We have 1 that's set up in the middle of the site, 6 that are along the perimeter within 2 miles of the site, and then 2 that are within 25 miles of the site. Along with those air stations, we have 19 TLDs, and so those are kind of set up in a similar pattern on the edge, in the middle, or within 25 miles of the site. There you go. Now, we do a lot of water sampling, and so one of the things that we focus on is groundwater monitoring. In our left bottom corner, we have an example of our wells being pumped out with water. We use, in our groundwater monitoring, we test for both radiological and non-radiological chemicals that could be present. And so for us, we have kind of 2 styles of wells that we test. We have scientific wells as well as private wells that we go out and test, and they can be set up in 2 patterns. The first is our cluster wells, so it could be on the same plot of land. We have 5 wells that are all at varying lengths or varying depths, and this allows us to test different aquifers. In some cases, we have network wells, which is just 1 well that's on a plot of land, allowing us to get to 1 depth of water. So it allows us to test just 1 aquifer. And for us, we have in total for 2017, 72 wells from which we could sample. These wells are not sampled every year. They're on a 5-year cycle. In 2017, we tested 4 wells, and we actually found that there was no tritium or alpha beta particles in that well. We did find a couple of higher concentrations of metals. However, those were all underneath the standards that are set by the EPA. So those metals could be nitrates, lead, copper, and we have attributed those to either agricultural effects or industry effects, or where there's been natural breakdown in the environment. This is a picture of an aerial view of the North Augusta drinking water facility. So that is one of the things that we focus on, is doing radiological drinking water monitoring. We have, 4 locations that we go and test on a monthly basis. Those locations are off of the Savannah River. So above the Savannah River site, we have the North Augusta location. And then below the Savannah River site, we have Perrysburg, Beaufort Jasper, Chelsea, Beaufort Jasper, and the Savannah River, or Savannah, City of Savannah drinking water facilities. So again, we go to those 1 time a month. And we have 2 co-located locations, or we sample from the same locations as the Savannah River site, scientist, or DOE, on the North Augusta and Perrysburg Jasper drinking water facilities. We also have 19 facilities that we go to on a semi-annual basis, and those are within 30 miles of the site. And we test those not because they're on a Savannah River-fed stream, but because they could potentially be affected by any atmospheric fallout. Along with our drinking water and groundwater, we do radiological surface water monitoring. So you can see that we go and do grab samples, we do composite samples, so kind of taking multiple samples and adding them together. We go to the Savannah River and collect samples from there too. And we do sampling in 21 locations. 13 of those locations are ambient water sampling. So for us, we go on a weekly basis and test for tritium at those locations. We actually have an early detection system in that weekly sampling where we go out 2 to 3 times a week and see if there's a higher presence of tritium that we eventually will, if we see those higher levels, will alert lower drinking water facilities that you may want to hold off and let that water pass through. Excuse me. And so for this water sample, as I mentioned, most of what we're looking for is tritium. However, we do non-radiological water monitoring. And so this group probably has the strongest arm muscles because they have to go 1 time a month and hoist water up from different streams on top of bridges, or different streams that have bridges on top of them. And so with this group, we have 9 locations that we visit 1 time a month, and we are testing for a list of chemicals, which I'll show in just a sec. But out of these 6 locations, we have about, or out of these 9 locations, we have about 6 that are co-located or sampled by DOE too. And this is a list of chemicals for which we are testing. So the 3 light blue shades, those are done out in the field. We can run those samples, or run those tests and figure out our pH, our temperature, and dissolved oxygen in the field. The ones with a dark blue water drop, those are going to be run in our lab in Aiken. We have a smaller lab that can handle that, but for the chemicals that are in the orange raindrops, those are going to be tested at our Columbia lab. And then the black raindrops are chemicals that we test twice a year, and those are also run in Columbia. Now, kind of shifting from water to sediment, which can also be found in water, sediment is focused on because it can act as a kind of a way for our aquatic animals to come in contact with radionuclides. So as runoff occurs or atmospheric fallout happens, it can be trapped in water and then sink down into the sediment. So that's what we focus on in our monitoring. And we have 24 locations with our sediment from which we sample. We actually have to do split sampling, which is where we go out with scientists from the Savannah River site. They help us collect samples, and we take from the same batch or the same shovel the half of that sample that they've collected. And so for us, we are going to take those from creek mouths on site, or creek mouths, on-site streams, and stormwater basins that are found on the Savannah River site. But the picture that I showed beforehand was where one of our scientists was sitting on a boat dock. We also sample at public boat docks, kind of seeing how the public could come in contact with sediment. And with our sediment, we are focused more upon looking for cesium-137, which can act similar to potassium-40 in the human body. Along with sediment, we also look at soil. As you can see, we go out and we pretty much just use shovels and grab soil samples. We'll take them back to our lab where we'll put them in ovens to dry out any moisture and get rid of any organic material that may be there. And then our scientists get to feel like mad scientists and use a mortar and pestle to kind of break that material up so we eventually can send that to our lab in Columbia. And with our soil samples, instead of going on site to take soil samples, we actually go around the perimeter, either right on the perimeter or within, I think, 5 to 10 miles of the perimeter of the Savannah River site in order to take those soil samples. And so for us, excuse me, for us, like sediment, we are interested in cesium-137 because we can see that with soil, soil can kind of act as like a vector for cesium-137 to either get into food that our game animals or our cows could eat, as well as it can leach into or have contaminants leach into our groundwater, which can then get into our surface water. Talking about vegetation, we do non-edible vegetation monitoring, and the non-edible vegetation that we focus on are wax myrtle, laurel oak, and Carolina laurel cherry. And if you've never smelled Carolina laurel cherry, it gets its name because it smells like cherry, or kind of almonds. So this is a more pleasant form to work with, I guess, than some of the other ones. But with these vegetations, we have, I think, let's see, we have 23 locations for which we sample, and with those locations we have 9 co-located areas that we share with the Savannah River site. Now, in this project, it's a little bit different than what our DOE scientists do. So for us, we go out 2 times a month and we collect the wax myrtle, Carolina laurel cherry, whereas for the DOE scientists, they actually go out 1 time a month and they check for Bermuda grass. So there is, it's harder to do a direct comparison with what they collect and what we collect. We do test for edible vegetation and the amount of radiation or radiological nuclides that could be present in those. But this is a little bit harder to go about collecting. So we have in the past had relationships with farmers that we have used, but that is all dependent upon the availability of food that they would be willing to provide us. So we do try to go out and do natural foraging for wild mushrooms or for other wild harvested edible vegetation. And in this, we are looking at alpha, beta, and gamma radionuclides, as well as tritium and cesium-137. We sample for milk, and with milk, we're concerned about this because, as I mentioned earlier with our soil, that can kind of act as a vector for moving our radionuclides or contaminants to our animals. And so just think about our cows are going to be grazing on fields that could potentially have been irrigated with groundwater that had contaminants, or it could be in an area where atmospheric fallout could have occurred. So if we are going to be consuming the milk that they provide, that could potentially mean that we would also be exposed to whatever contaminants they had been exposed to. And one of our biggest concerns with milk is strontium. So as I mentioned earlier with cesium-137, it can act kind of as potassium in the body. With strontium, it is a calcium analog. So that means that when it gets into our body, it's probably going to go for our bones. And so that's a concern, especially with people who are having babies that are developing. That's going to immediately go to their bones and their teeth. And so we want to make sure that the levels of strontium are not high in our milk levels either. And we have 5 dairies from which we partner and who graciously provide us with milk samples. And we do this on a quarterly basis. Now, I think one of the most fun activities or sampling methods that we do is electrofishing. So we get to go out on a boat that, I don't know if you all can see, kind of at the tip of that boat, it has some electric poles that we can, or electric wires that we can put into the water, and we send a current through it, and it allows us not to kill the fish right off, but it actually allows the fish to be shocked, and so they'll just kind of bubble up to the surface. So it's kind of like you're boiling fish in a way out of the water. So for any fishermen who are around us, it's the best fishing day of their lives, essentially. But for us, we harvest those fish and we bring them back to our lab, and we will fillet them and take out their bones. So with our muscle tissue, which you can see right here, we're going to be sending that to our lab to have it sampled for, or tested for the amount of cesium-137, which can actually store up in muscle tissue. And then we'll take their bones and we'll send that off to be tested for strontium-8990, which, as I mentioned earlier, tends to go to the bones and be stored there. And the types of fish that we collect are ones that we find a lot of, are common for anglers on the Savannah River site to collect, or on the Savannah River to collect. And with fish, we're concerned about them because fish tend to bioaccumulate, or kind of, as time goes on, whatever they eat gets stored, or whatever chemicals they eat gets stored up in their body and doesn't leave them. And so if we were to go eat these fish, we could potentially be exposed to whatever they've eaten. And so for us, for our freshwater species, what we'll be finding in the Savannah River, we go for channel catfish and largemouth bass. And then once we get closer to the coast, we're going to be looking for striped mullet and red drum. And we have 7 locations on the Savannah River that we, from which we take samples of fish. And then we have 1 background location. And excuse me, we do this 1 time during the year. And then last but not least, we do game monitoring. So we go and we have partnerships with hunters that are hunting right off the site, so within probably a 5-mile radius from the site, and they are going to be supplying us with hogs and deer. And similar to our fish, we're going to be looking not at the bones as much, but more at the muscle tissue, which is what people typically are going to eat off of those animals. And with that muscle tissue, our main concern is going to be cesium-137. So for us, we do this kind of, or we get samples kind of throughout the, or actually I may have misspoken, but we get samples I think 1 time throughout the year for our game monitoring. And from all of our, excuse me, from all of our media, we take kind of 2 doses, or calculate 2 doses. The first that I'm going to focus on is the maximum exposed individual dose. So from each of our samples, this maximum exposed individual, or MEI, is going to be a hypothetical individual. The way that we calculate this individual is we take the highest concentrated sample from each media and we calculate that dose. So instead of taking an average of all of the doses and all of the animals or vegetation or water samples, we're going to take the single highest detection that we find out of each of those media, and we're going to create this hypothetical individual's dose. So this is probably going to be a greater overestimate of what a person who's living right off the site would end up having as their dose throughout the year. And so for 2017, our maximum individual, or our MEI, or maximum exposed individuals dose was 9.997, whereas our average exposed individual dose was 2.384. Typically, the biggest contributor to both of these numbers is going to be a food source, whether that be a fungi, deer or hogs. And so you can actually, just to kind of give you a comparison of what that number means, the far left column is the dose that you would receive if you had gotten a CT scan. And so that's that is 1,000 millirem versus a chest x-ray, which is going to give you 10 millirems. Living in a brick house will give you 7 millirems. And compare that to what our MEI and our AEI were, and it's pretty consistent, or not consistent, but it's, it shows us that we don't have to be too afraid of the dose that we would be receiving throughout the year. And to give you another visual of kind of how our dose has turned out for 2017 compared to our past years, in 2013, or we compared 2013 to 2017, and as you can see, those numbers for both the AEI and the MEI are pretty comparable to what we have found throughout the years. However, you may be thinking, all right, what happened in 2015 with the MEI? And going back through our records, we found that there was a hog that had a higher reading. And so that is why we have a much higher reading for the MEI. So it was more of a spike in the reading that a hog produced. And so hopefully I didn't give you all too much information, but I know I didn't cover a lot of the data. However, since we do have our new data report out, feel free, if you have any questions while looking at that, to reach out to our office and we can end up explaining anything or answering any questions. And if you ask me any questions, since I'm not a project manager but more of the public information officer, we do have our scientists in the back who can give you a little more detail if you would like that. But thank you all for listening and showing interest, and if you have any questions, please let me know.
So a couple of things before we get started with questions. I just want to remind everybody that this is the South Carolina Environmental Surveillance Report and not the site's environmental surveillance report. Sometimes when we do these presentations, the questions get a little muddled between the two. So let's make sure that we stay focused on the South Carolina side questions. Something else is that when you are making comments, I know some folks commented to me that they were having a little bit of trouble hearing. The closer you speak to the microphone, the clearer it will be for everyone else, okay? So if we can just keep that in mind, pull it directly in front of you and speak directly into it. If you turn your head, the microphone needs to travel with you. Doug, let's start with you.
Doug, Howard Cap. Grace, very good presentation. The question I have is, if you were to find a high concentrated amount of tritium at any of your locations, kind of talk us through the procedure of what would happen?
Well, I can talk you through the procedure of least with our radiological surface water monitoring. So with that, as I mentioned earlier, we do an early notification system, and so I can kind of give you a better visual. All right. Of course, it had to be right in the middle of the presentation. But with, here we go. I feel like I'm blocking you. So we have this little system right here. This is a system that has multiple collection bottles in it. And what we end up doing is throughout the, I guess like a 2 or 3 day period, depending upon what time in the week we have to sample it, that system is pumping up water every couple minutes into individual bottles. And so let's say we found a higher reading once we got back to our office. We could use those separate bottles to pinpoint, okay, that higher reading started coming down the river between this hour and this hour. So in terms of the early notification system, that's what we have in place for our water. I may have Greg speak to other I guess, ways that we deal with higher tritium levels, or one of our project members.
Greg O'Quinn, South Carolina DHEC Program Manager. So are you talking specifically about water samples or just in general?
Well, any of your samples that you would be testing for tritium, if you were to find a high concentration of it, what type of process or procedure would you take from there?
So we have a procedure in place, like Grace-Ann kind of explained, as far as surface water is concerned, where we do have a notification procedure. If we see it above a certain level, that we let the downstream water users send a notification to them. The EPA standard is 20,000 picocuries per liter, and typically we see levels below that. We do have a notification where if we see it in a composite sample at our 118 location at 5,000, we send out a notification saying that we've seen that.
Okay, so would the public that is in that area, would they be warned in any way, or?
We usually let the drinking water systems know that we've seen it, and then I think it is up to them to notify their customers.
Okay, thank you.
Dave Isley, CAB. Thank you for that, Grace. You talked about sending off samples to labs. Do you have your own labs, or do you contract that out?
So depending upon the media, we have a regional lab, but that's pretty much only available for tritium from our water sources. And then I think we do E. coli. Let's see, if I go back through the water. There we go. So the four that are in the dark blue, so our BOD, total suspended solid, turbidity, and E. coli, we can do that in our lab in the Aiken office. But for those that are in the orange, we have to send those off to Columbia. And that usually applies for all of our samples. So most of our samples are going to be sent off to Columbia. We send those off each Thursday with whatever new samples that we have. And there are some samples that we have a contractor lab. And I think, is that mainly for groundwater that we use?
For the contract lab, we send some of our milk samples out and some of our surface water samples out.
And surface water, okay. So for milk and surface water, we actually have a contract lab that we can use to have them go through our data.
So what I'm hearing is you do your own radiological samples.
Yes, for tritium at our office, but we have to do alpha, beta, and gamma in our Columbia DHEC office.
But those are your labs?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's the question. Thank you.
Narendra Malik, CAB. I'm going to talk a little bit about air monitoring. There is a federal regulation which requires at SRS what the discharge limit could be of radionuclides in the air at the site boundary. Do you also monitor at the site boundary for the SRS, and how much is the radionuclides readings in your air monitoring program?
All right, so just make sure I have the question. So we do we monitor along the SRS perimeters? That was your first question?
Yes.
And then your second question was what again?
And if you have recorded what the levels are?
If I've reported what the levels are. So for us, we do have our air, and I'll try to get back to that. We have 9 air monitoring stations. Here we go. All right, here we go. So we do have some that are on the site itself. So this point right here, the BGN, is on the site itself. That's more near the center point. And then we also have along the perimeter 6 air stations and TLDs that are located either on the site or 2 miles within the site. And in our report, that's where we have like a cohesive list of what our results look like. Unfortunately, I don't have them stored in my mind right now, but the report does go through what we have been able to find out at the site in terms of tritium levels, and then also alpha, beta, and gamma particles.
I have one more question about the groundwater monitoring. Have you ever recorded any, what is called? Hang on a second, let me put my glasses. I wrote it down, what I would ask. Radon monitoring. Have you recorded any radon in the groundwater wells?
I would have to have one of our other scientists say that.
There was, I think we noticed a detection in some of the Jackson wells, but that was several years ago, and I think they've gone through and replaced that system, modified that system.
Thank you.
Ken Sajwan from Savannah. I'm a new member. I'm kind of wondering, all the data you have presented, this is all environmental data. Whether you're talking about water, soil, air, you have done a good monitoring job. Have you monitored human being also? Because all these things going to affect or impact the human being. Have you taken at random sample of the humanities or the human being, those who live around the Savannah River area?
Right. I think that's one of the biggest concerns is how is all of this going to be affecting humans, and that's why we do this monitoring, is seeing, all right, it starts first from the bottom of what is in our air, what's in our water, how are these going to be getting into our animals that we eventually eat. But unfortunately, our program is not focused upon the human side because we don't have trained, I guess, physicians or health representatives to kind of break down the data and say this is what it means for a human. So the Department of Health, we do have Department of Health and Environmental Control. We have yet to bring in that health side. We're just focused more upon the monitoring side, so hopefully one day that may be something in the future that we could look into, of having the health side come in and kind of break down our data.
Okay. Joyce?
Sorry, I'm trying to take notes. Joyce Underwood, Cab. My question is about bones. So you said you don't take bones from the hogs and the deer and I think the fish, correct?
So we only take bones from the deer, we only take bones from the fish, which have strontium, potentially have strontium, and then we look at milk for strontium.
Okay, so if you're not checking the bones of the, wait a minute, if you're taking it from the milk, this might answer my question, but let me go anyway. I was trying to be close to the mic, it doesn't like me. So if a deer or a hog had strontium in its bones and you didn't know, and then this was like an issue with the herd, and they all, start dying in the wild and decomposing because that's what happens, would it lead to a buildup of it in the groundwater, which might ripple effect because of the circle of life?
Potentially. I think we would have to do a much longer study to do that. So unfortunately, we don't focus upon, I guess, the life of one animal and how that could potentially get back into the ground because of the circle of life. But that could be something that could happen, but I don't think we have data on it to say that that is what happens.
Is that such a unlikely scenario that you're not worried about it?
I think for our lifetime, yes, but Greg, you...
Yeah, I think we're primarily concerned with any edible portions of the animal. And so as far as what you're talking about, we don't really look at it that way.
It could happen, what you're saying, but it's not going to affect me. It's going to affect, my great-grandkids or something.
Right, so, which is why we do the groundwater monitoring and the soil monitoring and sediment monitoring, and that way we would capture anything along those lines with that media.
David Vargas, Cab. Since I drink a lot of milk, I was just, where is the milk collected? Is it still at the dairy farm, or is it further downstream during the milk production process?
It's at the farm. So we, as I mentioned earlier, we have partnerships with 5 dairies located, I guess, within 50 miles of the site. And with those dairies, for their protection, we don't reveal who they are, but they are collected on site. We actually, I think we go to the silos where the milk is stored, and we just kind of collect a bottle from that silo.
Right.
So very
We
fresh.
typically let the operator collect we observe the operator collect the sample from the bulk tank.
Okay. All right. Carl?
Yeah, your focus
Can you-
primarily, it's Carl Steen, Aiken. Your focus is primarily on tracking, monitoring, establishing baselines, and determining outliers, and that's fine. That has to be done. But in my life experience, what you don't know is what gets you. And where do these standards, basically where do all these standards come from? It's kind of, I'll just leave it there.
No, that's a good first question. And unfortunately, John Richards is not here. He's from the EPA, but all of our standards are based off of the EPA or other science institutions that have multiple years of research that have been able to say, all right, for drinking water, this standard is 200 or 20,000 picocuries per liter for tritium. So all of, as I mentioned earlier, Aiken's branch of the environmental affairs for DHEC is kind of the boots on the ground effort. So we're the ones doing the regulatory work, putting that into practice. But in Columbia, in our headquarters, they're the ones that are going by EPA standards and creating standards for our state. So it's from multiple years of data and kind of analysis that we are able to say, all right, this is a good, this is a healthy level for us to live by as citizens of South Carolina.
Thank you.
Is that clear enough for you?
Very much.
Okay.
Bobby, I saw your car was up. Somebody steal your question? Man, we're going to have to talk about that. All right, any other questions from around the table? Gil.
So, I'm assuming all this is not free to do all this monitoring. Is it?
It's not. We have some help along the way.
Okay. How do you receive your funding to get this done? Is the state pay for it?
Because we are in an agreement in principle with DOE, the Savannah River site, and DHEC, we are actually a federally produced grant. And so I may switch the, is that what you like me to say, Greg, or any more on that?
Sure.
Okay.
So as Grace
So
Ann
Greg, how are you funded?
How we're funded? We are actually part of a remediation and environmental monitoring grant that is funded by DOE.
Okay.
This grant is on a 5-year cycle, and we actually just renewed it this year. So we're in the new 5-year cycle, which runs from FY19 to FY24. Typically what we do for the grant submission is we try to do our budget projections for each year for the entire 5-year cycle, and we submit that for approval. This covers everything from our personnel costs to our operating costs, and our operating costs are equipment, supplies, contractual, and travel. For this current 5-year period that we are in, we actually received less than what we asked for in the past. We have sufficient funding for FY19, the year that we're currently in. But moving forward towards the end of the grant, those funds kind of drop off a little bit.
What's drop off the board mean?
Not as much as we currently have.
Okay. That's great.
We were able to, we had 2 vacant positions, and we were able to kind of use some of those personnel dollars to help us cover some of our operating funds for this year and for what we had requested for next year. but moving forward, the last 3 years of the 5-year cycle aren't as much as what we would like to see and what we.
So is the grant granted by DOE, or who's the grantor?
We submit our request to DOE.
It's requested to DOE. And whoever is that something that comes out of the site budget, or is that something somewhere else? Mike, I don't know if I'm asking. I don't know who I'm asking.
What was the question again?
Does that grant come out of your budget, or where does that come?
Yes.
It comes out.
That's right in our budget, yep.
So does SRS make that decision, or is that made in Washington?
I defer to my esteemed colleague, Angela, who knows the facts.
Good afternoon, Angela Holmes, DOE Savannah River. The budget does come from the site's budget, and we did just go into the renewal of that grant. Several things were looked at. One was the carryover from the previous years in the 5-year grant, and that's why it was at a lesser amount for now. It is not carved into stone, and we've discussed it with DHEC. In the latter years, if there is a need for additional funding, we go and we will use that projection when we do our annual budget development.
So when you get the whatever budget, I mean, you get the final budget from the Hill, and you use that number, and you come out with it, and you make the decision for them?
We actually get the projection going into budget development. So for the budget development for FY21, we will discuss with DHEC their needs for the FY21 year.
Okay. Thank you.
And we just submitted our FY21 requests, so that will go up to them and they'll take a look at that.
Okay. Okay. So good. I just wondered how the sausage was made there. So thank you.
Any other questions from around the table? No? All right. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Up next, we have draft recommendation discussions. So the first one up is going to be the Pollinator Management Program, one that Joyce has alluded to a couple of times. Everybody should have a couple of copies of it. Joyce, whose name is at the top of that one?
I alluded to it once.
Huh?
I alluded to it once. It's my name.
Oh, alluded to it once. I'm sorry. I've heard you talk about it a couple times today. So are you ready to go over that one?
Sure.
All right. Let's cover a little bit of the background just to refresh everybody and then hit the recommendations.
You just want me to read it?
As soon as she pulls it up.
Oh,
Give her just a second. She's getting there, I promise. First day, less than a month on the job.
Do what?
Less than a month on the job.
I would.
Don't rush.
I'm wondering if it's going to squeal again. It didn't like me before, remember?
Oh, no, you'll be fine. Go ahead and pull it up. You're good. All right.
Okay. This is our pollinator management plan that was drafted by Narinder and put my name on it. Don't let me take all the credit for this. It's totally undeserved. And it reads, pollinators are vital to sustaining life on our planet. Over 95% of the top 100 food crops that make up most of the world's food supply are pollinated by bees and other wildlife. Over the past 5 decades, there has been a dramatic and alarming decline in the number of pollinators. This decline can be attributed to many factors. 1, natural disease and colony collapse. 2, decreased food supply and destruction of natural habitat. And 3, overuse and improper use of insecticides and herbicides. There is also some debate as to the effect of electromagnetic fields generated by high voltage power lines on pollinator species, particularly bees, and further research into the matter is sorely needed. With an ecosystem as large and diverse as the 310 square miles of the Savannah River site, steps should be made not only to protect, but to encourage a healthy pollinator population. Flowering shrubs could be used for landscape accents around buildings. Pollen-bearing trees, such as the tupelo and poplar, should be encouraged in wetlands. Recommendation. The SRS CAB suggests that the DOE SR to consider the following for the rejuvenation and enhanced growth of and development of pollinators at the site. 1, plant indigenous pollen-generating flowers, trees, and shrubs throughout the site, including the right-of-way, and consider exploring the effects of various environmental factors on pollinator species. 2, develop a management plan in concert with the U.S. Forest Service to protect the pollinators in the areas designated for clearing and/or controlled burning in order to provide alternate native ecological habitats for the healthy growth and development of said pollinators. All activities should be approved by a designated single committee comprising of biologists from SRNL, SREL, and Forest Services to ensure the minimization of damage to the ecological environment for the pollinators of the area. This effect could help to reduce the loss of pollinators at the site and surrounding communities. 3, designate one single entity, such as an oversight committee, to monitor and approve the application of all insecticides, fungicides, and herbicides that are used on the site. Questions, comments, concerns?
And so if I remember correctly, Joyce, correct me if I'm wrong, but this was first brought up in October, and then we took it to the November full board. We did a few edits there. We took it back to committee, discussed it in December, and now it's back for its second round at the full board meeting.
Voting on this in December, but here we are. But that sounds right.
I read the summary in between the break.
December was a long time ago.
December was a long time ago, but here we are, and this is what we're doing. So, looking at the draft in front of you, are there any questions, comments, suggested changes, edits that anyone around the table feels that we need to make? Anybody feel strongly about this?
Not like wordsmithing, right?
I mean, today's the day for it. So if there is something that you
it's
see that needs to be
nitpicky
changed,
stuff.
well, here's where I was trying to help you out by going over the fact that we went through this committee 2 times and it's already been in a full board. There's probably not a lot of wordsmithing left over to do. But if somebody has a suggestion, we should absolutely take a look at it. AK.
James.
AK Hassan with the CAB. I was just trying to find out, can you provide for us a list of the pollinators that will be, put into place, and some synopsis as to the anticipated reproduction and spread, et cetera?
So there's probably some old presentations that I can point you to that would cover a list of pollinators that this is addressing. I know that in large part you were probably looking at bees, but not exclusively. But there are a large number of pollinators.
As near as I understand the topic, it's bees, birds, and certain kinds of wildlife that carry pollen. Mammalian wildlife, I guess is what I should have said.
But I'll see before tomorrow if I can find a more complete list for you. Okay.
Thank you.
Doug.
James, just one thing, just for the sake of the new members, could you kind of go over how we do the process as far as Monday going through this wordsmithing and then the next day?
That is an astoundingly good idea and something I should have done.
Yes.
Yeah. So, folks, just for the sake of the new members, we talked a little bit about this at your orientation. On committee meetings is when we do a lot of the heavy lifting on draft recommendations. Somebody will bring an idea, they'll have a copy. There'll be a lot of wordsmithing at those committee meetings. You'll vote as a committee on whether or not to forward it to the full board, and if it's approved, it makes its way to here. On the first day of the full board today is when we make all of our wordsmithing, all of our changes, the drafts. We look at the recommendations, if there's anything that needs to be edited in the background as a group. On Tuesday, we vote on the draft recommendation as finalized today, up or down. We're not going to make any changes tomorrow. So if something needs to be addressed, if there's something that you think needs to be looked at, we need to do that today. Today's the day to make changes. Tomorrow, the only thing that we could do is say yay or nay to it. Okay? Any questions about how the process itself goes forward? All right. How about this? Any questions about this recommendation? I'm going to ask one last time. Jerry.
Jerry Mossbarger, CAB. I guess I'm just curious being new. I look at something like this and I see a whole lot of costs that will be predicated or actually come out of this. Do the committees take into account the costs that are going to be associated with these recommendations? And if so, who? I look at Mike
So,
Budney and say, what, this has come out of his budget if it does occur?
I will say yes and no. To some extent, you probably shouldn't always look at costs as a determination of what you think as a member of the public the department should be doing. The cost, I hate to phrase it this way, but that's their problem. They can figure out how to pay for it if it's something that they choose to adopt. Now, when they respond to the recommendation, that may be part of whether or not they say that they can do it. Will be, we can't get it in this year, it's something we need to work towards this year. On the other side of that coin, as an individual CAB member yourself, that is absolutely something that you can take into account whether or not you want to support a recommendation. You may look at an idea and say, it's fiscally impractical, it's irresponsible, no. And that's okay. That is absolutely okay to take that position. And you should all feel the right to take the position for support or against a recommendation for any reason that you see fit. Okay? Joyce?
Joyce Underwood, CAB. Wow, that was really loud. In addressing your topic, my approach as the committee chair to this topic, because we have talked about this at great length, you are not the first person to bring that up, and you're probably not going to be the last, has been that we are representatives of our communities, and therefore our way of telling the department what we think is important is through the medium of a recommendation. So even if they're going to tell us no, this is a document that can be referred to as the committee's belief, not the committee, the full board, like the community's belief of what we think needs to happen. So you're right, I've had that same question. This is going to cost a lot of money, but even if it does cost a lot of money, maybe it's something that's really important to the community at large, and therefore now we have a document that says so. Does that help?
I think so, yeah. Thanks for that, Joyce. Anything else? Anything that we need to address? How about the recommendation itself? Do you guys feel good about it? About the wording? Feel like you, Joyce?
I literally want to get rid of one word.
One word?
Yeah.
Which word?
I know. When I read it out loud, it sounded wrong.
Where is it?
Where it says the SRS CAB suggests that the DOE SR to consider. I think to is no. We need to get rid of it.
Get rid of what?
To consider.
Oh, the to consider.
Yeah.
Get rid of the two? Okay, we can cut that. I love it.
I think it's good otherwise.
Any other questions, comments? Greg?
All right, Greg Murray, CAB. I have some thoughts about the wording. I wonder if it would be possible for us to have, before we make a final determination, to pass it on for tomorrow. Could we have a short break to consider some of the wording?
We can do
For
it.
instance, it looks like we're setting up as the goal for the rejuvenation and enhanced growth and development of pollinators. And if we look at number 2, it seems like the effort, they're talking about the effort could help reduce the loss of pollinators. So these seem to be different objectives. There's one to reduce the loss and there's one to enhance pollinators. It seems like if we could be consistent in that, that might be helpful to DOE as they're considering our suggestion.
Joyce, you had a thought? Your card went right.
I don't understand what he's saying. I'm
Narinder.
so sorry.
I think the intent is the same, but it's described in 2 different ways. Because the second one we're talking about when they clear the U.S.
I'll get you to right here because I
Forest Services clean the area or have a designated burning. So during that time, they should make sure that the ecological habitat is not damaged or they provide a different habitat for the insects.
All right, Joyce, you got words. I saw something get passed to you.
Joyce Underwood, CAB. Okay, he handed me what he's talking about. In the first part, before we get to number 1, it says, consider the following for the rejuvenation and enhanced growth and development of pollinators. Then at the end of bullet point 2, it says this effort could help to reduce the loss of pollinators at the site and surrounding communities. And I think maybe where we're all getting confused is about pollinators. What we're saying, to change it and make it maybe more understandable, the rejuvenation and enhanced growth and development of bees. And if we're going to get more bees, then we don't want to lose the bees we've got. Not necessarily bees, but just to make it easy. Like pollinators is abstract. We want the things that carry the pollen to propagate. So I don't think that they're in opposition of one another looking at it, because we want to rejuvenate and enhance the pollen-carrying creatures, and this effort could help to reduce the loss of said pollen-carrying creatures. Is that, I mean, is it saying the same thing? I think it's saying the same thing.
Greg Murray, CAB, as somebody who used to review legislation, I would argue it's not saying the same thing, but, you know, I'm not going to, we get the gist of what the objective is here, so I don't know if this is something we need to revisit extensively or not.
Yes, Joyce.
I'm totally open to changing it, but what would you change it to?
I'd pick either reducing the loss or enhancing. I'd go one way or the other. I'd either keep with what's in the intro to the recommendation, where it talks about rejuvenating and enhancing.
Okay, I see.
And I'd delete the last sentence in number 2, probably is what I would do.
Just delete the last sentence?
That's probably what I would do.
Wait. Let me look.
Just delete the last sentence in number 2. Because it's a descriptor of what you think it could do as opposed to what you think the department could be doing.
And then we just end on the minimization of damage to the ecological environment for the pollinators of the area, period, done. Okay, that's fine, if you're okay with it.
Just cut that last sentence. In the microphones, please, okay, folks. Okay. Please talk in the microphones.
I'm so sorry.
Please.
Narendra says that he's...
I think we can delete that last line.
Delete that last line?
Yeah.
All right, you two are good with that? All right, that's what we're going to do. Strike that last line out of number 2. And just go ahead and delete it. There we go. And that's what we're going to go with. Now, anything else on this one that we need to talk about? Last minute concerns? Pitches for or against? Everybody feel good about voting for this one tomorrow? Just give me a nod, yes. You know how you're going to vote. You know what you want to do. You kind of know, you feel good? This side of the room? Yep, okay. Let's move on to the next one. If you'll drop this one, Heather, and let's pull up the NERP. There we go. All right. And Tom, you ready to lightly cover the background and then hit the high points?
Okay, I sort of did before. I'll do it again.
Yeah.
So this Savannah River site was designated a NERP in 1975. And a NERP, a National Environmental Research Park, is an outdoor ecology lab. And the DOE is then designated, I believe, 7 around the country at different sites or around sites, like the one around Oak Ridge is quite large, up into the mountains. So what happened was the ecology lab was charged with managing this National Environmental Research Park. And what they did was they went in and looked at 30 different set-aside sites, sites that would not be developed. And then they did baseline studies on all 30, and they did it for multiple creatures, fish, birds. And they did these studies, and then they've gone back and revisited them over time. But lately, there has not been a lot of funding to support this activity, and the ecology lab has not been able to get back in the field and re-baseline those studies. So this recommendation is to try and alleviate that situation. So I'm just going to read the recommendation part. And I know we're going to have wordsmithing on the text because Dave's already given me one. So the recommendation to fully utilize the scientific knowledge provided by the NERP effort to date, the CAB recommends that the DOE provide additional resources to the Savannah River Ecology Laboratory to allow the laboratory to, 1, reassess the definition and marking of the set-aside areas to ensure there is clear opportunity continuity in future studies. Update the 30-plus baseline studies of the set-aside areas to understand current impacts from site activities. DOE should consider adding a new study of pollinators in the set-aside area, and that would go along with Joyce's recommendation. Make sure this knowledge is more available to the public. The term public should include scientific community as well as the regional communities.
And you said you already had one edit that you wanted to put in?
Dave does.
Dave?
Dave Vavagas, CAB. In the first paragraph, under background, we're talking about NERPs, and then the last sentence, we say, closed to the general public for over 67 years. These areas, and I'm going to recommend that we insert these areas in SRS.
Okay.
Now team with wildlife.
So leave all of that. It's just after 67 years, after the word these, insert inside SRS.
This is the sentence. You want me to read it?
Okay. And then the next one?
That was it.
That's it?
Yeah.
All right. Julia.
I'm a new member, and I'm more of a comment. I have probably more of a comment than a question, but I read the first section and I thought it was really well written. But I read also the recommendations, and you mentioned set aside areas, but nowhere in the background was set aside areas mentioned specifically. So I was wondering what they were. The verbiage isn't congruent between the two, that's all, with the set aside areas. And it's implied, I think.
So let's look at it like this. Is it something that we need to add in so that the recommendation is better understood? Or because I'm sure the department would understand the concept of set aside areas and what you're talking about already. So is that a change that we need to make? To Tom. He's reading. He's verifying whether or not it's there.
I'm trying to figure out how to clear up your confusion. We need to say what set-aside areas are.
The microphone. All right. So
I'm trying to figure out how we clear up that point. I'm trying to figure out where we would insert something. It's in my brain, so I know it, but
okay,
we got to get the paper.
Let me ask it a different way. So if all we need to do is define what a set-aside area is, I think that that's something that we can probably do after the meeting. So if you want to think about it and know that we're going to come back tomorrow with that language inserted, okay, we can probably handle that one. Let's take a look at the recommendations themselves. Is there anything within those towards the end of the document that we need to adjust? Dave Isley?
Dave Isley, CAB. Tom, on 2, let's see, update the existing studies, and that you've got some additional fluff there. Just say, and add a new study of pollinators and set-aside areas, and that'll go along with Joyce's. Instead of asking them, should they consider, just add the pollinators. You want the 30 revisited, and you want to add another one.
The reason I worded it that way, Dave, I take your point, it's a good point. But the reason I worded it that way is because I want to make sure that when DOE considers both these together, there's no conflict. They can say, we're not going to do that, we're going to do what Joyce recommended, or we can add it to both. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah,
it's kind of waffly, but
that's what I don't like about it.
I know, but that's why I did it, because when it gets to whoever's going to read it and decide.
Just so I understand, you want to leave it separated like it is now so that they can respond to it independently?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do.
That's fine.
I'm cool with it.
Okay.
Number 3, some more waffly stuff you might consider. Make this knowledge available to the public, and take the rest of that stuff out of there, and let them decide.
So you want sure that deleted.
And more available. Just make it available to the public.
Oh, I see. Sure in that and more. How do you feel about that, Tom?
I don't know what that means.
I would be glad to take out more.
Okay.
But I would make sure that this knowledge is available to the public.
Yeah, and more. Yeah, okay.
Because that requires funding.
So
Okay,
go
that
ahead and cut
requires
more.
Bigger data systems
Delete
available
that
to
one.
the public. So
And then,
that's why I put make sure.
If you're going to humor me, that's easy.
so you still want to keep it as make sure?
I would like to,
Okay.
but get rid
So
of the
that'll
word
be the good
more.
compromise, right? We'll keep make sure, and then we'll delete more.
Okay, that's fine.
All right. Joyce?
Joyce Underwood, CAB. DOE should consider adding a new study of pollinators in the set-aside areas be another bullet point by itself?
Oh, as a independent recommendation number?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe.
We had 5 in the committee, and the committee felt very strongly they wanted to collapse it to 3 key points. So we
Okay.
rolled the pollinators into that. Since you're going to have to go back and look at the baselines, we just want to make sure pollinators are part of that baseline.
I see, okay,
And
that's fine.
That's just what the committee wanted to do. So.
All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns from around the table? All right, how do we feel about this one for tomorrow? Everybody give me a head nod that yes, we want to do this? Yep, this is what we're going to do? Okay.
And so I will try and find the very
In the
best-
microphone, please. I
It's
got to
time-
have
it's
it for the
time
minutes.
Okay, I'll try and find the best place to put the set-asides, and fortunately, Gene Rhodes is here, and I will consult with him, and he'll help me make sure I got the right definition.
Yep. All right. So we'll get that verbiage in this afternoon. So don't leave. Don't run away. You got to hang out. Yep. You got to hang out and get those words in. Jerry.
Again, maybe it's because I haven't been part of the past, but when you say make sure this is available to the public, why do we specify scientific community and regional communities when the public is the public? And those two entities are part of the public.
Tom?
The reason is because it's a different form of communication. So the scientific community, you're going to put up a lot of data, not useful for the communities. For the communities, you're going to have somebody like Grace come in and write it all up so it's readable and available, and people can go in and look stuff up. That was why I made the difference. They have a lot of scientific data available now up online, but I have a lot of environmental background. I can't read it.
I guess my question is then why do we not do this for every recommendation, that we make them available to the scientific community as well as the regional communities? Because that's what you're indicating, sort of, is we don't do that, evidently. And they're part of the public, so I just comment.
So a lot of recommendations aren't based on science. So the environmental monitoring, right? They do both, and the SRS people, and then they work with DHEC, and DHEC also tries to do both, so that they have the hardcore data, just reams of data, and then they've got these good high-level descriptions that are available to everybody. So it depends on what the basis of the recommendation is.
What Tom's really trying to do is just make sure that the data is available in multiple formats. So available actually means available as opposed to, all right. Anything else? Going once, going twice? All right. Let's close out this one and let's pull out our IPLs. So I think it was last week, somewhere in the middle of the week, I sent you what Heather's about to pull up. This is draft letter on the integrated priority list. So for those of you who are with us in January, you will remember that John Lopez gave a presentation on all the program baseline summaries, talked a little bit about what each one was and what the department was doing with them. Then he asked you if you would provide input to the department on what you think their priorities should be. And this is your opportunity to communicate with the department on your priorities, on the community's priorities. So where do you think DOE SR should be focusing their attention? That's what this letter is about. DOE SR, Savannah River folks, will use this in their communications with headquarters and on up
to let them know how you feel about the budget. This goes places. This isn't just local. So what you have in front of you is a draft letter. It is copied nearly verbatim from last year, what you wrote. All I did was change the dates on it, change the fiscal year numbers, just so that it would match up with what we're currently doing. This is only a starting point. We can go anywhere from here, and we can prioritize wherever we need to. So with that, are there any questions and comments about the IPL itself and what we're doing right now? Dave.
Dave Isley, this is probably a question for Maxine. You used to have like 3 PBSs. Is it all rolled into 11 Charlie at present?
Maxine Maxted, DOE. Yes, we used to have a PBS 12, which was our spent fuel program, but last year they rolled PBS 12 into 11C, so it's all in 11C right now.
Okay.
Does the, Dave Isley Cab, does the money that comes from NNSA for L area, is that part of that PBS? Are we talking the same color of money here?
No.
So that's EM money. We do get money for our foreign fuel receipts. Is that what you're asking about?
Is that also, does this letter address that, or that's your contingency money?
So this letter is for, my understanding is for EM funding and priorities for the EM funded.
Right.
Fair enough, thank you.
And to be clear, that's also, these priorities are irrespective of funding amounts. You're not necessarily asking for a specific dollar amount to be attached to anything. You're saying that when they go to fill out the budget, what do they fund first? You know, if that makes sense. You know, what is the most important thing? All right, what's second? What's third? Let's go down the list. And for the past few years, the number one thing up there in that opening paragraph has been the liquid waste program, with some other priorities listed underneath it. So, any other questions or comments about what we're doing now before we launch into the letter itself? Okay. What are your thoughts, folks? What do you think about this set of priorities? Joyce?
Joyce Underwood Cab. I have a question because I don't remember the one for the first year. No, I wasn't here that one. So last year's one of these is the first one I ever saw. Are we always on there, PBS 100?
Usually not, no.
Why did we put it on there last year?
Some member believed that at the time that the order of activities within the PBS indicated some level of priority, and really it was more, I think, alphabetical than anything else that particular year, and they just wanted to see the cab listed first. It passed, that's what was sent up.
Oh, yeah. I see.
And so that doesn't necessarily...
Well, has it been reprioritized since last year?
Well, there wasn't a priority to change there because that list was not in a priority type setting. Does that make sense?
Well, then what are we asking for with number 8?
I don't know. What are you asking for?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking you.
If it's something that you feel like you need to take out because it's not helping you with anything.
I mean, is the point of it being on there to make sure we keep getting funded so we can do this?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was the board member's intent, but I don't think it has any value in it because those listings within the PBS don't have an internal priority to them. So listing it first has the exact same effectiveness as listing it last or in the middle.
Well, not that I don't love doing what we're doing right now, but I feel a little like ethically stretched, prioritizing myself above anything else.
Okay.
Just throwing
so
that out there.
You'd like to pull number 8.
I mean, I guess I need to dig out my PBS list because I feel like surely there's something more important than me, but maybe that's my low self-esteem talking.
As a group, how do you feel about it? Don't everybody jump in at once. Dan, you have any thoughts?
I do have an organizational thought that maybe next year we do this prior to the new board members coming online, only because we now have a quarter of the people who never touched this, never got to see it, and we're asking for input. Maybe a January meeting versus a March.
We can look at doing it in that order. I think there's a reason behind why it's in this
cycle, but we can check at that when we get back to the office and see if that's something we can
My
do next
input
year.
on the letter itself, I think we're probably safe signing it as is. I think the only thing that would take is some research to understand that the PBSs are still set up with our expectations from last year. I think more importantly is if anyone's focus has changed. I know we've talked a lot more about infrastructure this year. So if we want to move that up the food chain, that would probably be something good to focus on today.
What do you think, folks? Any thoughts, additions, changes? Doug, you look like a man who's satisfied. No? You are?
Doug Howard Cap. I'm good with everything. I don't think there's, we have to do too much more.
Okay. AK.
AK Hassan with the CAB. So the PBS on item 8, is that just specifically specifying the funding of the CAB and the operations that we have in terms of travel, et cetera?
PBS 100 covers a lot of other community activities. I want to let Zach Todd speak to that because he's smarter at this than I am.
I wouldn't say all that, but the big things that are in PBS 100, primarily the one that gets the most visibility is PILT, payment in lieu of taxes. PILT, payment in lieu of taxes, and that's the money that goes down to the county. So I believe that is, in CAB boards in years past, was one of the reasons why I was up there, and they actually ranked it as a priority among the actual CAB.
Only yes, because it feels icky, because it feels self-serving, but apparently I'm the only person that thinks that, so.
Mike, you have a thought.
Yes. So there's no priority order within the way we list things in PBS 100. They're actually listed that way, so it appears the same every year to make it easy for the appropriators to compare one year to the previous year. So we don't go back and rewrite the whole thing. We just keep listing them in the same order. There are some things that where there just is no priority order within the PBS.
So
The important thing is that we put in the number for the CAB every year within that PBS.
So there's not an ethical conundrum, it's just a perceived ethical conundrum.
Well, because it's also a perceived benefit.
Right, that's my problem. That's what's sticking in my craw.
Well, let me rephrase that. There's a perception that this is actually accomplishing a thing. Everything after PBS 100 is irrelevant because it's going to be listed in the same order every time no matter what, because it has nothing to do with a priority within PBS 100.
Okay, so I think we should just get rid of the second half of it.
Yeah, everything after the comma.
I mean, yeah.
How do you feel, folks? Do you want to get rid of that? What do you want to do? If everybody speaks at one time, I can't hear. Doug, do you want to cut it? Everything after the comma? PBS 100, period, full stop.
Doug Howard Cab, yeah, I could agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about this? Everybody else okay with removing that? Yes or no? If you'll nod at me, give me some indication that I'm actually making a difference here. Yes, no, yes, yes, yes. Okay. Let's just cut everything at PBS 100 after the comma. Yes, AK?
I'm just trying to be clear on this. Are we talking about moving it up within the framework of 100? Are we talking about movement?
There is no movement. No, just deleting.
Third priority.
Just PBS 100, leaving it at number 8 there, and deleting everything after the comma, because there is nothing, no priorities within the framework of PBS 100. It's all equal.
So I'm just not clear on what it was referencing then. What was it referencing? Third priority?
It wasn't.
Okay, just overuse of language.
An overuse of language. I love it. Yes, that's exactly. So if you cut everything after that and make it a period and full stop, these are your priorities. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Down to your 8. Dave.
So I was, Dave Robakas-Cap, I was just looking to see what all else is included beyond what Zach had told us. It's the payment in lieu of taxes. It's the DHEC remediation and environmental monitoring REM grant. It's the emergency management agencies. It's the Citizens Advisory Board and the EPA, South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers interagency agreements. So there's a lot of
things in there.
Yeah.
Sir?
Yeah, Mike Buddy, DOE. So as far as, the listing things in priority order, in 2019, PILT was #1 on the priority list within PBS 100. It doesn't appear in FY20. So there may not be any advantage to being listed first.
Anything that we need to add, take away, expound upon? Folks, now's your chance, because tomorrow we're going to vote on it as is. So now's your opportunity to comment. Do you feel like these priorities are out of order? Do you support a different order? Gil, what do you think?
I just hate to turn in the exact same thing year over year. Because it's I hate to turn in the same thing year over year because it just feels that, we're not making progress as a CAB. Some of the things we have here, looking at number 2, PBS 11C, I remember sitting in North Augusta discussing this. That's where we were, right?
Yeah, last year.
And I don't remember the conversation, PBS 11C plutonium downblending processing for disposition to the waste isolation pilot plant. Are we really to that level where we're saying this stuff needs to go to WIP? I understand as Dan so correctly brought up, a third of us on this board may not even understand what WIP is, waste isolation pilot plant. Keep spent nuclear fuel processing within the amended record of decisions, spent nuclear fuel downblend for disposition to the TVA. I'm just, I think we all have our own way of saying it. I'm just being a little reticent because I'd rip this up and start over. And I agree with the PBS 11C, being 1 and hitting 2, but it's somewhat redundant. PBS 30 is debatable. We can definitely debate that. Sufficient funding to ensure adequate programs for all EM missions and site maintenance above and beyond the projected spike in the payment of pension obligations. That supersedes everything to me. I understand that we want to have the radioactive liquid tank waste stabilization and disposition at #1 because we've heard from DHEC for years about that's the #1 thing in South Carolina that we need to focus on. I get that. And I don't want to minimize that, but the sufficient funding to ensure adequate progress for all EM missions, I think those of us that have been on the board and heard me chirp about the budget enough and about funding enough knows that's my heart. Here we are at PBS 41, 235F, redaction project or reduction. I'm not reading well. We're going to hear Charles's committee is bringing that to us tomorrow. So we're getting some movement there. I just think as a board, as the Citizens Advisory Board, this is what we're telling the Department of Energy. This is what we want to see getting done. And I feel like we're just kind of in a whirlwind right now and saying, yeah, it's good, whatever. I'm more of a simple person in these. When we talk about recommendations and things, I'm really excited to see the recommendations are getting shorter and we don't have 2 pieces of paper when you give us a recommendation. But I would say PBS 14C, PBS 11. Then I would.
#4 to #1.
That's me, and
How does the group feel about that? There's a lot of opinions about that. I'm going to start with the site manager for obvious reasons, and then we'll go around.
You guys can do this any way you want, but have you seen the FY20 budget request yet in detail?
Not detail.
Because it came out today.
It came out today?
It is on the DOE website now,
okay.
in detail. So I would suggest that you review that first, see where the pluses and minuses were, what the impacts are of where the, of those, because, for instance, PILT is not in the budget,
That's huge.
right? Might be an issue you're worried about. Nuclear materials, I think you're up 10 million from the previous year. I believe that's the number.
Maxine.
Are to our plans.
Thank you. James, when is this letter due?
Usually, Zach, usually we send this letter to them right after this meeting, after the March meeting.
Yeah, after Mr. Budney started talking about studying the budget, that started kind of rolling in my head. And I'd have to go back and look specifically when we use this, but as we're kind of coming through the processes and stuff with the Hood and Sued, I can't tell you the exact date that this starts to be used. I want to say it's right around the EM1 budget brief that you do is when we first lay this out.
This is for the 21 budget, right? We're just starting the process to build that. So we got a little time.
So, I mean, so if we make a motion to table this till the, what are we, in April?
It would be May. Your next meeting is May if you table this. So it would be May 13th and 14th.
And I mean, I know that goes out of our normal schedule.
Right, so I think as long as we have it for the EM1 21 budget rollout, I think we'll be okay.
The 21 budget rollout, I'm not quite sure the terminology you're using there. There's a 20 budget. We're about to roll out the 20 budget.
Right, no. There's a brief that's...
The briefs to the EM1.
And I believe it's titled the budget, or maybe budget rollout's not the correct term, but there's a 21 budget.
I know what you're saying. We'll have to get back to you with the data net, Gil.
So,
but
yeah, Mike,
my gut is May's going to be okay. We can update your preferences anytime in the budget development process, which takes all summer.
Yeah, with your with what you said with the budget being released today, I think that's a supremely important point. Thank you.
Yeah.
And
Normally
so,
you would have had the budget. Well, I shouldn't say normally.
What's normal?
Theoretically, you would have the budget out, the citations, and then you can decide what the priorities. Yeah.
That being said, there's still several cards up. So let's get the voices out, and then knowing full well that we're going to table this, we're not going to vote on it tomorrow. We're going to bring it back up in May.
The board hasn't spoken.
Well, that's true. Tom?
So, Tom French, I like the idea of tabling it since the budget's out. And then if you could facilitate us getting a hot link to the budget or however we get it, so we'll be able to review it. And we can
I found it pretty quick with a budget search or a Google search, so we can get it out to everybody.
Okay, and then we can do some email kind of consultation with each other.
I'm sorry.
We could do email consultation.
No. That's again, we're not allowed to do
Oh, we're not allowed to do that.
You got to have your discussions on things in public.
We have to be on in committee. So your committee most certainly could talk about it, strategic and legacy. Any committee could talk about it. You can talk about it in committee, or you can talk about it in full board, but we cannot do email correspondence, no.
Yeah. All right. Joyce?
Joyce Underwood Cab. Okay, now I have a question. Thanks to you two gentlemen. Is this something that maybe we should all talk about in our committee meetings in April?
I think you should definitely spend a few minutes talking about if some of these budget things do impact your committee's priorities and bring it back to the full board. And you may not have anything that you want to add, but maybe you do.
Okay, that was not my original question. Thank you so much, though. My original question was maybe more of a comment because of what Gil said earlier about where his heart is with the budget. And maybe that's how we need to look at this document. There's certain things that we know are going to get funded because they have to or because that's a huge priority for the department. But there's other things like PILT, and it really hurts my heart that it's not on there, just FYI, that maybe are not going to get funded. And in that particular instance, I don't know if you new people understand what that is, but it's payment in lieu of taxes for the counties where the Savannah River site has taken land out of the county, so therefore they cannot generate tax revenue from people who live there because nobody lives there, the site is there, and so the site gives those counties money to support their municipalities and whatnot and their county infrastructure. And if they don't get that money, it would be like devastating as far as I understand. So that's really, really important. And I don't even live in one of those counties, but that's super important, right?
Joyce, let me interrupt for 1 second. It hasn't been in the budget, was it just last year? And DOE, I mean, Savannah River, and with Mike's leadership and everybody, they got it. It got through. It wasn't in the budget, but DOE made it happen. It wasn't, or was?
Yeah. Let's let the site manager
A
speak to
little
it.
nuance on that. So it wasn't in the budget request last year, and the appropriations staff had us re-rack our request, and so we had to take that money out of operations to fund PILT last year.
Much appreciation there.
So they took it out of operations to fund. Yeah. All right.
Joyce,
So
then
the site
okay.
visit is very important.
Well, obviously, and I think we all do, and I guess what I'm trying to say in a grander scheme of things, we need to all, as individuals and as representatives of our community, think about what is most important to the communities that we represent and get it on. Think about that as we move in towards our committee meetings next month.
All right. Dave.
Dave Osley, CAB. The DOE's mission is risk reduction and nuclear material disposition. Number 1 and number 2, that's the bulk of what they do out there. I don't see how you put anything in front of that. Just me. That is their mission.
We'll keep that in mind. Dan?
Just a couple points. John Lopez in previous presentations had always stated the IPL letter was kind of due right away. So is there any chance that we could find out for tomorrow's meeting if in fact, when you can, last minute, have the IPL letter for your consideration for the budget for 2021? I'd hate to go away from here this month and be totally lost and we've missed the boat.
Nope, we'll figure it out.
Okay, thank you. So if we need to, I mean, we could act on the fly tomorrow if we had to carve it up tomorrow.
Yeah, I was kind of on that same wavelength too, but I mean, we have a full day tomorrow, and the IPL list, I mean, last year I think we did spend at least an hour on it. So is Zach still here?
Yes.
But I mean, yeah, if we could have that date, that would be great. I mean, I agree with you.
Just to be safe.
Yeah, I hear you.
Tomorrow.
I was just want to let you know that DHEC was asked for their comments too, and our deadline was given as April 28th.
Right.
So I don't know if that helps.
That's my fear.
I understand.
The other comments that had come up, though I appreciate the health and well-being of every individual in this community and their financial stability, I am, as a member of this community, focusing on my EM mission, and that is for environmental management. And so that may sound cold-hearted when it comes to dollars and cents, but that's where my heart is EM progress. And secondly, Gil, you brought up some excellent points. I never like giving the same letter year over year either. This is very close to actually 2 years ago as well. We had some significant tweaking last year. We introduced the whole pension legacy issue, and that was a very wise move because that's based on new information. So to me, this CAB, sending a consistent message year after year is also as important as anything else. And we can't be having them chase the sun, moon, and stars one day and say, hey, rein it in and go do something completely different next year. That would be my fear, that we're sending multiple messages and we would look schizophrenic and not consistently in harmony with what we want to have accomplished. And I think the big hitters, I think we've had enough discussion on that they, from many agencies and the public themselves, are our greatest concerns. And I don't honestly feel that any single one of these, regardless of the order we put them in, is being belittled or diminished from a budgetary standpoint. I think it's really just stating our case that these are the things we really want to see some movement on and to see adequately funded and not have any cuts come our way on those particular topics. So whether it's number 1 or number 8, I'm going to nod with you, Gil. Whether you want to scramble the pot, no matter what, I'm voting yes for this IPL letter when it's finally drafted. And just one order of legalese and typo there. In the paragraph after number 8, please change FY 2020 to 2021.
Yep. So yeah, I didn't catch them all.
Yep. That's why we got a bunch of eyes on this.
Yeah. All right. So let's do this. We know that we're going to come back tomorrow. We're going to get a better idea of when that date is. Hopefully we can push it out. We'll make a tabling decision tomorrow. Let's wait until then. That way we can spend a little bit of time talking about it. We can spend a little time rewriting it if we need to. And if we've got to, we can vote on it. But we'll make a decision on that tomorrow based off of hard dates. Okay? That way we address that very real concern. Any thoughts? AK.
AK Hassan Cab.
In the microphone, please.
The budgetary process, even though we have new information out today, that process is still ongoing. Is that correct? Correct. Okay. So with that in mind, even if we come to some type of agreement and vote to approve tomorrow or in May if we put it off, but particularly tomorrow, what is the process for amendment? Let's say, for an example, we approve it tomorrow, some changes in the budget. Do we have to, at some point, not necessarily have to, but if we wanted to, what is our process for amending our decision?
I know the answer, but
Mike Michelanis, Department of Energy. AK, maybe this will help you, because I don't know, you're new to the CAB. I don't know how familiar you are with the federal budgeting process, but it's a 3-year cycle. We're working on 3 different levels at any one moment in time. We're currently implementing the 19 budget. The one that was rolled out that the site manager referred to is the budget that was submitted to Congress for implementation in 20. You're providing input into the formulation of what the administration will issue this time next year to Congress. So what happens on the Hill in the next 6 months or whenever they pass a budget or a continuing resolution, et cetera, the reason the site manager said, hey, you got to go look at what came out this year is to get a sense of what the budget forecast looks like coming out of the administration now to reflect into your prioritization for what you would recommend for 21. Does that help at all, or did I just answer a question you already knew?
It helps. I still would just need to understand an amendment process, but it clearly helps. It explains what's going on.
So once the 2021 letter goes up, it's included. There's probably not really an amendment process that goes into that. So that being said, that doesn't preclude you from making recommendations that may impact future budgets down the road. Okay? So that would be your avenue for expressing an opinion on changing circumstances. Joyce.
Joyce Underwood, CAB. I just have a question that maybe all the committee chairs will benefit from the answer of. When this thing is formatted, are they all supposed to be PBSs, or can you pick stuff out of the PBS? Like, what is the format of this list? Like, how do you do it? Because on here, they're not all PBSs.
We've all in the specific PBSs, or if you want to keep it generic and say PBS 14, that's fine as well. But generally speaking, like, it is helpful to have
a PBS reference.
Well, not necessarily the reference, but like if there's something specific that you're talking about within that PBS is the priority, that can be helpful.
Oh, right. Okay. So like with PBS 100, PILT, CAB, whatever, like have it out to the side.
Right, because there's the PBSs have a lot of different things in them sometimes.
Okay, and I have another question. It's maybe administrative. Because we're going to take this probably to the committees, should we all come back from committee to the full board with like 5 priorities from each committee? Is that a good idea?
I would say bring back the input that you feel your committee needs to cover. And I don't mean to give you a Weasley answer like that, but you know, there are a lot of PBSs and there's a lot of programs within each one, and as Zach was just saying, and as a group you focused on these. So there's no reason why at your committee level why you wouldn't also take the same approach and focus on those few that you think are most important. It may be 2, it may be 5, you may come back with a really, really long list that we call down as a group at the full board. But you need to send the input to the full board that you feel is most effective and important to you.
So basically just each committee makes their wish list and then bring the wish lists back.
Yeah, and then we're going to edit down as a group. Dave.
Dave Abakas, Cab. Back to the PBS specific question. Pensions are the ones that are spread among many of the PBSs, so you can't have any pensions in PBS specific.
Right, which is why 5 was written the way that it was.
So Mike Michelaus, Department of Energy, don't get hung up over the format, whether it's got to be PBS or not. If the cap, your job here is to specify what you think is important. The department will translate it into the right PBS and things like the vernaculars. You guys focus on what's important to you, and then let the department do the translating into the budgeting process.
Okay. Tom.
Yeah, Tom French, I just have one comment. If each committee does their own thing, and Gil sits on every committee, he's going to scramble everybody's numbers. I just want to point that out.
That'll be all right. It'll be fun.
But not Tom's committee. Not Tom's.
Any other thoughts, questions, concerns, views on the IPL that we need to cover? All right. So we'll get you some information for tomorrow and we'll see if we can make a decision. With that being said, I just checked the sign-up sheet and I didn't see anyone signed up for public comment. Is there anybody who would like to make a public comment? Seeing none. Gil, you want to close it out until tomorrow?
Well, close it out is kind of a relative term. We're going to be back tomorrow.
Okay, adjourn. Recess. That's the word.
Recess. James, help me out. Is it 8:30 or 9?
It's 9.
It's 9 o'clock. So everyone be here at 8:30 tomorrow? Good day of meetings, good conversation. Thank you for the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control. Great reports. I know you've all gone through a change, and that's not always the easiest thing to do, especially with someone who's been there so. Questions. Spotlight on what Joyce said. She likes asking questions, and she's not afraid to do it. So take her lead if you have any questions to ask. AK, first meeting and you're asking questions. I'm impressed. Yeah, that's not always that's not the norm. And there was, we had others ask questions too. So new cab members, thank you very much. So tomorrow you're really going to sink your teeth into some presentations. You're going to get a lot of information. Keep standing or sitting here and talking, but I'm not going to. And Tom is being very specific. He wants me to shut up. So that's on the record, Tom. Thank you all very much. See you tomorrow.